For more chapters, join my Patreon, link in description. Chapter 31, The Person Who Sees, The Person Who Solves 3. Aiden, Leo, and Tessie, who were sitting on a bench in a quiet garden, had yet to come back to reality as if what happened a while ago was a dream. It was Tessie who came to her senses first. So we really didn't get punished. It still feels like a dream. I know, right? Who would have thought that the principal would take action and side with us? I know, right? Leo, who usually had sharp conversations with Tessie, agreed with her completely at that time. The two people's eyes soon turned to Aiden. They stared at him as if asking if he had anything to say. Hey, Aiden? Aiden? Huh? Oh, yeah. What are you thinking about? Unlike the two who were happy to receive the award points, Aiden showed a serious face the whole time. Aiden, do you have any concerns? Well, should I say it's a concern? Well, I know that it's kind of weird to say this now. So what is it? Don't hesitate and say it so your heart will feel more at ease. When Tessie strongly whined at him, Aiden hesitated for a while before confessing his concerns to his two friends. It's just that something is weird. Weird? What's weird? The werewolf yesterday. You may not have seen it, but the werewolf's neck was tied with a strange silver leash. What? SHH. As Tessie raised her voice, Leo immediately gestured to her to be silent. Be quiet. What if someone hears you? The three looked around and checked if there were any other listeners, and then they put their heads together and spoke in quiet voices. Keep talking. Is that true? Yeah, I'm sure. That's also why I tried to stop Professor Ludger. A leash, you said. Are you saying that the werewolf is not an ordinary werewolf? I think it's really someone's intentional experiment. If his story was true, it was bound to be a serious problem. Leo also opened his mouth with a heavy expression, as if he was thinking about something. Me too, I heard a rumor recently. What is it? That there are suspicious people hiding in Surin. Suspicious people? What's that? You're talking about a secret organization, right? Isn't it just a secret club or false rumor that the students created by themselves? There was nothing unusual about having a secret meeting between students in Surin. Leo shook his head at Tessie's question. If it was just that, he wouldn't even say that the rumor was suspicious. I'm not sure either, but I think it's clear that a secretive organization that has not been revealed has permeated Surin. I realized it, especially after I saw this werewolf case. Wait. Then you are saying that there are dangerous people in Surin. It's just still in a level of doubt, but I'll say so. Aiden, do you think so too? Yeah. Honestly, it's not a good thing to suspect someone, but I'm sure something is off, and I think that, in particular, Aiden shook his head and shut his mouth as he tried to say something. No, never mind. What is it? Is it because of Professor Ludger? At Tessie's straightforward words, Aiden wasn't able to lie and nodded his head. The reason why Aiden's heart has been weighed heavily since a while ago was because of the violent behavior that Ludger had shown the previous day. I don't want to be suspicious of Professor Ludger, but the way he looked last night was somewhat strange. Strange, you said? You may not have been able to see it properly because you were covered by Professor Ludger's back, but I was facing him from the front. At that time, Professor Ludger saw something. The reaction that Ludger showed at the time was obvious, even though it was just a brief moment. Aiden hadn't missed it, but before he could ask about it, Ludger had forced him to get away and burned down the werewolf. Leo held his chin after hearing Aiden's words. Do you mean Professor Ludger tried to destroy the evidence? What? Professor Ludger? Is that possible? Tessie asked back as if saying that he was such a fool to say so. No matter how likely it was, she couldn't believe that Ludger Chelsea, who had helped them and fought fiercely with the werewolves, had something rather secret beyond his action. I'm not sure. However, I keep thinking that Professor Ludger might know something. The professor at that time seemed to be in a hurry to hide something. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. There's no way a Surin professor would do such a dangerous thing. But what if it's real? What if Ludger Chelsea is a part of a secret organization that's too dangerous to talk about? What if he killed the werewolves to destroy evidence? Are you idiots? No matter how likely it is, you still went too far. Tessie put her hand on her waist and shook her head while rebuking the two. Professor Ludger must have thought of something. And when we were talking face to face with the principal earlier, didn't you think something was weird? Oh, what? I didn't think so. Phew, idiots, don't you remember what the principal said when she complimented us? She pinpointed each of us for what we did well in our deeds. Oh, right. She did. I couldn't think of it because I was so focused on something else. Think about it. How would the principal, who wasn't even there, know about it? Oh, of course, someone told the principal everything. And who could tell the principal about what we did? Ludger Chelsea. It was just him. Professor Ludger was pretending not to, but he actually witnessed everything that we did. If he wanted to scold us, he wouldn't have told the principal our good deeds. Ah, listening to Tessie, it certainly seemed so. Only the principal and Ludger came into the counseling room, and when the principal said she would give them award points, Ludger took a step back and yielded. Everything is Professor Ludger's plan, but why on earth? I don't know it either. Still, Professor Ludger cared for us and only told the principal good things about us. Isn't it too much for you to suspect Professor Ludger? Aiden and Leo had nothing to justify their previous remark. To be honest, it was indeed true. If Ludger was a suspicious person, would he have taught them the groundbreaking spell of source code in his first class? It doesn't make sense for a person who had to hide his identity to reveal it instead. Is that so? Aiden scratched his head, but he couldn't get rid of his subtle doubts about Ludger. He was sure that Ludger was a respectable professor, but he also couldn't deny that there was indeed something strange about him. Yes, Tessie, I think you're right. It's meaningless to think about it right now anyway. Yeah, as long as you know that. More than that, I'm hungry. Did you guys eat? No, not yet. How about Tessie? Why me? If you haven't eaten yet, why don't we go eat together? What? Tessie wondered if she was mistaken when listening to Aiden's words. What? Eat with me? Are you for real? Why? That's because eating is, As she was embarrassed, Tessie twisted her hair with her fingertips and murmured softly with a blushed face. 4 fellow friends. We're already friends, right? Looking at Aiden, who stared at her while smiling brightly, Tessie's ears turned red. Leo, who was watching the scene from the side, sighed and shook his head. Seeing that childish girl who couldn't be honest and his friend who had no sensitivity whatsoever, he thought that his daily life in Surin would be eventful. Oh, Professor Ludger? It was after I was headed back from work. On my way back to the accommodation, I met Professor Selina. She, who found me first and ran toward me like a puppy while making a fuss, looked more like a student in the academy than a professor. Isn't she lying about her age? Are you off from work? Yes. I heard the news. Yesterday I heard that you caught the werewolves. Yes, I got rid of them. Whoa, really? Professor Selina was looking at me with a burdensome gaze. Still, we were fellow new professors, but I thought that she was looking up at me too much. All they've been talking about lately is only Professor Ludger. More than that, how on earth did you catch the werewolf? Was there any method to do it? Wait, pardon? I'm a little busy today, so I'll talk to you next time. Listening to my firm words, Professor Selina nodded with a slightly sullen look like a child scolded by an adult. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called you when you were busy. No. It's not that I couldn't answer your call. Have a good rest, Professor Selina. Yes, please take care on your way, Professor Ludger. I greeted Selina and separated ways with her. Unlike other professors, she was a good person who was interested purely in my achievement. However, I couldn't get close to anyone because I was in a tight position. It was still possible to eat together as a group. But that was all. And first of all, I had one thing to do immediately. When I returned to my private accommodation, there was a package at the door. Taking the package, I went inside the accommodation and checked its contents. It was data that Ainz had sent me. Areas where missing people and some particular people had gathered recently in Leathervelk. After checking the contents briefly, I headed to my private study. On one side of the wall in the study, photos were pinned everywhere, along with a map of Leathervelk City. I cut out some of the contents of the document and pinned them to one corner of the map. An area full of abandoned factories in Leathervelk, an abandoned slum. There was a laboratory around there. After I finished pinning the locations, I immediately took out a portable crystal ball. As mana flowed in, a voice came from beyond the crystal ball. Did you check all the data that I sent? Yes. As you told me yesterday, I checked the surrounding area. In one abandoned factory, about 10 strong men rushed in and out. I think I'm sure about that. I see. And I personally checked what you told me to. Some laborers have recently gone missing outside the city. Was there a family of 3 among them? There was. It's the only case where a whole family disappeared. The police didn't do much investigation and hushed it, but their neighbors must have been very nervous. The data came out easily after investigating a little bit. I got it. I will go there soon. I left that message and cut off the communication. After staring intensely at the map fixed to the wall for a while, I left the accommodation while wearing a dull brown coat that was unlike my usual one. One dark night, in Leathervelk's factory area, where starlight and moonlight disappeared due to the thick clouds in the sky, the chimney of the factory, which stood tall without emitting any smoke, became a tombstone in honor of those who died in the shadow of the city. Considering that there were actual people who died due to a difficult environment, the word tombstone was not particularly wrong. The slum area, usually called an abandoned area, had a strong sense of desolation because there were no street lights that were sometimes seen from time to time. All he could see was a gutter rat passing by the ground quickly. Ludger arrived at that place where even vagrants gave up begging and gave a wide berth. "You came?" Hans, who had arrived first and was waiting, welcomed Ludger. Hans looked at Ludger's face, then he shook his head and clicked his tongue. On the surface, he looked nothing like a danger, but Ludger was already heavily armed. Hans could feel that Ludger was thoroughly prepared for the fight ahead, judging from the bitter energy emanating from him. "Will you go alone? Will you help me if I ask you to?" "Well, I thought I might be able to deal with 1 or 2 of them." "Never mind, it's enough for me alone. What kind of guys are on the inside?" "There are nearly 40 people, but it seems like they know that they're in a rush. They're slowly leaving this place. It'd be in vain if you were here 3 days later." "What's their power?" "You'd better assume that each of them and even some of the nobodies have guns." "Well, guns won't work against you, who's a wizard, but there are about 3 of them who are wearing strengthened armor." "What about their elite's power?" "There are 2 black wizards." "I see." The entrance was a large pipe tube that was drilled for wastewater disposal. Ludger, who was about to head to the laboratory, stopped and asked Hans a question. "Hans, the family that I asked you about beforehand?" "Yes." "How old was the kid?" "Their kid, you said." With his back against the wall, Hans looked up as if he was thinking of something. The sky was full of gloomy clouds. "He was 7 years old. He was still such a little boy." 7 years old, huh?" Ludger moved his legs again. "I see." Chapter 32, A Step Toward the Truth, 1. Ludger headed to the entrance of a secret laboratory that was decorated with a large wastewater pipe. The wastewater pipe, which was rusting everywhere and full of odors, seemed real. But when he went a little deeper, the scenery changed right away. The inner wall of the wastewater pipe neatly changed, and even the odor that used to reek disappeared. Ziying. From beyond that place, a sound was heard with subtle scarlet light. Ludger immediately advanced with caution while trying to show as little sense of presence as possible. "Ha, I'm so bored. How much longer do we have to stay?" "I don't know." "We still have more than 2 days to spare, so shouldn't we wait a little longer?" "Why did those damn experiments escape anyway?" "We're not going to get caught yet, so it might be okay. We are cleaning this place up and going to leave to prepare for the worst possibilities." "But I'd rather be guarding like this. It's a mess inside currently as they are organizing the equipment. It's time to switch shifts soon anyway. Arg, if only those sh*TTY experiments hadn't escaped." Ludger leaned his back against the wall and listened to their conversation. The 2, who were bored due to having to stand on guard for a long time at the entrance, did not stop chatting. "I was outside at the time. How did that happen? Did the management make a mistake?" "There must have been a mistake. I heard that the kid who was kidnapped didn't take medicine often, so he didn't turn more cryptid-like. Maybe it's because he's still young." "So, why do you even ask?" "So when I tried to pull him out to inject more drugs into his body, he resisted." "I heard it's really painful to be injected with the drugs. Is it true?" "I'm sure it's painful because they scream loudly, but the problem is that his parents made a ruckus there." "What?" His parents, they had already become werewolves, yet they were still trying to protect their kid. Yes. The scientists didn't know that they still had some reasoning. They were angrier than we expected, and the inside the laboratory was a mess. Damn it. So that's why they escaped. Isn't it a bit dangerous then? Haha, dangerous, my ass, don't worry. I heard that we asked a reliable person to take care of the werewolves. Anyway, I'd have stepped on the werewolf pup until he died if I were there. He made us suffer like this. I see. Ludger felt that he no longer needed to eavesdrop on their conversation. Because he had already found out about everything and how things were turning out. Splash. As Ludger stepped on the water that was puddled on the ground, the two people who were chattering immediately closed their mouths and stared at him. What? Who's that? Isn't it just a rat? Magical lights were shining around the entrance, but the place where Ludger stood was relatively dark, so he couldn't be seen. The two men pulled guns from their waistlines. But before that, two beams of light flew out of the darkness and penetrated the middle of their forehead faster. Bam, bam. Without even being able to scream, the two men who were guarding the entrance collapsed right on the spot. It happened in the blink of an eye. Ludger walked slowly out of the darkness. He was wearing shin-length leather boots, black pants, a gray vest full of pockets, and a shabby brown coat over it. His face was covered with a black hood that was drooping down to his nose, and he wore a hood that covered up to his forehead. Ludger walked past the corpses and went into the secret laboratory with ghostly silent steps, and not long after he entered, a scream rang out from the inside. Help me. The man who was patrolling near the entrance appeared from the dark and ran away desperately from a monster that had killed all of his colleagues. He didn't know from where the monster had suddenly appeared. Like a mirage, the monster had suddenly appeared and killed his patrolling colleagues in a flash. What did the guys who guarded the entrance do? At the moment he thought so, his sight turned upside down. Oh! His body swayed, then he fell forward. He couldn't move his legs below the shins. Why on earth? He looked down at his legs and finally realized why. His legs were cut off under his shin. The moment he recognized it, the pain came belatedly. He gritted his teeth and glared at the darkness behind his back. Beyond the wide passage was a darkness where all the lights had gone out. He heard footsteps from there. His spine became cold and every hair on his body stood on end. It was a guy. The intruder who had suddenly appeared and killed all his colleagues. He is already coming after him. Step. The intruder slowly emerged from the darkness. He covered his whole face as he appeared from the darkness, so he could not be identified. However, based on his sturdy build, it was clear that he was a man. He warned the man in a trembling voice. You thought you'd be able to get away after messing with us? I don't think you know who's in there, but you're already done. The man didn't respond. Rather, the man's eyes that were seen beyond the shadow of his hood became sharper, his lips and throat became dry. As soon as he wondered if he should rather beg for help, a large number of people flocked from beyond the passage. Here! There was a noise here. In the distance, he saw mercenaries approaching the place with magical lights. All of them were packed with guns. One of them especially stood out as he was heavily armed. The man shouted as he discovered his colleagues had come to his rescue. Here, this way. Here, ha, you are dead now. You will turn into a honeycomb in this narrow passage. Ludger thrusted a dagger into the mouth of that noisy man. When the dagger was pulled out, blood splattered and his body fell sideways. It was then that the troops who arrived just in time discovered Ludger. There, shoot him. They aimed their guns right away without asking who Ludger was, perhaps because they were well-trained soldiers. Meanwhile, Ludger stood still as if he were stuck on his spot. Shoot. They pulled the trigger right away, but there was no gunfire. Oh, what? Clack, clack. No matter how strongly they pulled their triggers, the bullets didn't emerge. Their guns were not broken, but the gunpowder was frozen. A stream of cold sweat flowed down their leader's cheek, who had instructed them to shoot Ludger. In this case, he understood from his own experience. Silence of fire. He's a wizard. It had been a long time since weapons based on gunpowder emerged as the world had evolved. Nevertheless, wizards and knights still kept their positions of being those who held the most power in the world. There was only one reason for that. It was because guns were not threatening at all to knights and wizards. Knights with superhuman physical abilities could easily avoid or cut down ordinary bullets. On the contrary, wizards didn't have to do that. The silence of fire spell that they used made it possible to prevent the incoming gunshot. Silence of fire. It was literally a spell that suppressed the performance of gunpowders that was targeted at the wizard within a certain range. The spell made it possible to neutralize even machine guns if used by a third-rank wizard. If a fifth-rank wizard used the spell, they could even neutralize a cannon. If a sixth-rank lecture wizard used it, the flow of the war would change from then on. That's why wizards and knights could maintain their powerful spots, even when the era of guns and gunpowder had already come. But the spell that Ludger used ended in the third tier. So Ludger realized that he couldn't go beyond that, and made up for his lack of power by strengthening the casted spell. When a common third-rank wizard used Silence of Fire, their effective range was within a radius of 20 meters, and the effective range of the Silence of Fire that Ludger used was within a radius of 200 meters. Darn it! Everyone, pull out your weapons. The people affiliated with the Shamses school were quick to make a move. They threw away their meaningless guns and immediately took out their swords and clubs. ZZZZT. An electric current flowed all over the clubs. Ludger raised his hands at such a sight. Each of his hands held a revolver. Idiot. When you're using Silence of Fire, even your guns are useless. Shu, the man who was laughing at Ludger, fell backward as his forehead sprayed blood. Everyone watched the scene with a pale complexion. What just happened? What? How the hell? Ludger had obviously shot his gun, but it wasn't a bullet that he fired. Magic. It was actually mana, which had the shape of a bullet. Therefore, there was no sound when he shot, and the Silence of Fire spell itself wouldn't be affected. You! Did you want to fight in an equal battle? Ludger laughed at the soldiers and shot bullets of his mana randomly. Ratatata, however, even though he seemed to shoot randomly, the bullets hit their foreheads precisely. In an instant, blood and screams were rampant. These idiots! Everyone, get out of my way. A big man dressed in massive armor stepped forward. His reinforced armor, made of black synthetic metal, easily deflected the mana bullets that Ludger fired. It was an armor suit that had been reinforced and made with recent engineering development. Its movement was slow but very sturdy, and it required tremendous strength. It was used exclusively for great knights. That will be a bit of a bother. Die! The big man in reinforced armor rushed toward Ludger with his arms wide open. His stomping steps gave off a sense of intimidation, as if he was a rushing tank. Ludger was not panicking or frightened at all. After withdrawing his revolvers, he took out 2 karambit daggers, which had the form of crescent moons, from his waist and held them tightly. You're going to have a close-up battle as a wizard. As soon as he reached out his arm to grab Ludger by the collar, Ludger's figure distorted and disappeared. What? Where did he disappear to? The moment the man in the reinforced armor was dumbfounded by his disappearance, a terrible pain punctured his forearm. Blood gushed from the gap in between his armor. What? A dagger pierced in between the joints of his armor. How the hell? No more than that, he's so fast that I can't even see. As soon as he tried to move his left arm, there wasn't any strength left in his left arm. It was because something cold and sharp had pierced down his armpit. What? Next was both of his ankles. Before he could come to his senses, the tendons of his legs were cut off and he knelt down on the spot, and lastly, he felt a cold touch on his neck. Help! Ludger cut his throat with a karambit dagger without listening. Damn it, Gabe was defeated. Get out of the way. I'm gonna fight him. That time, it was someone with a slightly different type of reinforced armor who stood in the front. He was wearing brass armor, which was not black but yellowish, and white steam spewed out from behind his shoulders. It was a reinforced exoskeleton made with steam engines. Both of his hands held onto a huge gun barrel, and the end of the gun barrel was connected to a large Tesla coil hanging from his back. Die! ZZZZZZZT. A purple current engulfed the passage. The high-voltage current of the Tesla gun, which wouldn't be affected by the silence of fire, spread in all directions and splashed sparks of electricity. Biwahahaha, what could you do? But he had no choice but to stop laughing. The high-voltage current that he fired was not moving forward. It was as if it had been blocked right in front of Ludger. What? No, to be exact, the electric current was seeping into a metal that had popped up in front of him and was permeating it. Is that a metal magic based on alchemy? No way, he was a guy who specialized in metal among the elemental properties. He was doomed. A Tesla gun that shot high-voltage current did not work against wizards who used metal elemental magic as their attribute. He realized it, but it was too late. Ludger pulled out his revolver again and fired his mana. It hit exactly at the Tesla's gun port and made it explode. ZZZZZT. The electricity spread all over the place, and all the people nearby burned into ashes. The only one who managed to survive leaned his back against the wall and stared at Ludger, who was slowly approaching him. Half of his body was already charred, and he was barely breathing. Gasp, gasp, see our crazy bastard, why the hell are you doing this to us? He felt it was unfair for some reason, but Ludger didn't even reply and just walked past him. He didn't kill him. He couldn't survive in that state anyway, so Ludger was going to leave him in pain a little bit longer. How many people have I dealt with so far? About 20 people. There were still about half of the troops that were left inside the laboratory. And seeing that they weren't approaching him, it was clear that they were preparing to encounter him from the inside of the laboratory. Most of all, he could feel that gaze, the gazes that aimed at him from the gaps of the pipes that covered the wall. Eyes that were glaring at Ludger. Is it black magic that utilizes insects? Hands had said that there were 2 black wizards inside. He had heard that some of the black wizards could also explore areas that were difficult for others to discover by utilizing insects' vision. Maybe it was him who was watching Ludger. Fee! Ludger exhaled lightly while swinging his right foot and walked lightly on the ground. Clang. The noise of the floor as his boots stomped on it. It became an echo and spread wide and deep to the inside of the laboratory, the inside of the laboratory. The scientists there were bound to be very anxious. Are you sure this is all right? We need to destroy the data right now and pack the experiment's drugs. Oh, it's all right. It was the blonde man with a tattoo on his neck that stopped the feeble scientist. The blonde man's outfit was also quite light, and he didn't look like he possessed any weapons, so it seemed as if he had come out just for a trip. But everyone knew that the man was the most influential black wizard in the laboratory. The same went for the giant bald man who was sitting quietly next to him. The bald man's name was Veron. The blonde man's name was Bruno. Although they weren't related by blood, the 2 were black magicians who had their own reputations in the underworld. They were called the Insect Brothers. Because there's only one opponent. The younger brother, Bruno, stated the information that he had confirmed through an insect. Yeah, surprisingly, there was only one intruder. He couldn't believe that it was only one guy who had wiped out 2 people with reinforced armor and 1 troop that was armed with guns all by himself. Who on earth? We don't know that either. Maybe the Empire's security department has discovered us. Security department. Security department. An organization that consisted of only of the most elite troops within the Empire. Among them, there was one Night Order affiliated with the security department. The Nightcrawler Night Order, of course. They were a little different from the ordinary knights. The scary thing about them was not only that each of them had brutal individual power, but also that they would use any means necessary to achieve their goal. They were knights, but they didn't act as square as the other knights. Rather, they killed their enemies by thoroughly prying into their opponent's weaknesses, then piercing into those weaknesses and killing them. They were knights who could kill even a 3-year-old child without mercy if the child was judged to be harmful to the Empire. It was no wonder that they were called the devils of the underworld, but the way he fights is a little strange. He wanted to identify his appearance a little bit more through insects, But he didn't know what trick that intruder was doing because all the signals were cut off from the insects that he sent. Did he notice that they were watching him? He was not an ordinary person either, considering the fact that he was coming alone. "Brother, we need to get ready." "Yeah." The older brother, Veron, stood up. The laboratory's guards were also very nervous and held up their shields and weapons. The passage from the entrance that was heading to the center of the laboratory. It was when they were all prepared while staring intensely at the passage to encounter the intruder. A strange wavelength swept through the interior of the laboratory, and soon all the lights went out. And darkness engulfed that place. What? Hurry and turn on the lights. Turn the backup power on. Looking at his men, who were moving in a hurry, the younger brother Bruno looked at his older brother. "Brother, I think he's playing tricks on us, though." "Brother." There was no answer from Veron. Bruno looked back at Veron. Even in the dark, his large size could be clearly distinguished among the silhouettes. The silhouette of Veron, his head was cut off and his corpse rolled on the floor. Chapter 33, A Step Toward the Truth, too. "Damn it, brother." Bruno reacted as soon as he confirmed that Veron's head had been cut off. Countless insects wriggled through the gaps in his clothes. Bruno quickly racked his brain. What that man used was the sound waves, and he even used metal magic. Elemental properties were divided into 10 elements: fire, water, wind, earth, plants, electricity, metal, ice, darkness, and light. There were also unknown properties that had yet to be revealed. In the case of sound magic, it was often seen as an offshoot of wind elements because it uses atmospheric vibration. And what Ludger used to stop the Tesla gun was the metal property magic. Metal is an element that is derived from the earth. The elemental properties that can normally be handled by the wizard are made up of only similar characteristics. According to Bruno's judgment, Ludger's elemental magic that he was able to handle were wind, earth, and metal. Usually, in the case of wizards, there were about 2 to 3 properties that they could handle. No matter how skillful they were, they could only handle up to 4 properties. If they could handle 5 properties, it could be said that they were within an area of natural talent. As a result, wizards basically casted 3 elements that their opponents had to deal with. That was basic common sense, and it was an obvious thing. If he's dealing with wind elements, the characteristics of small flying insects won't be good against it. Then I'll have to solve it with my men who have giant builds. Since he wasn't sure yet, he could not rule out the possibility of Ludger having a 4th element. A giant centipede with a thick crust poked out of Bruno's sleeve. It was an insect that could not be seen in a general ecosystem, created through black magic and subspecies hybridization of specific insects caught in the southern jungle. But the centipede's neck that Bruno pulled out was cut off in an instant. It took less than a second for the sharp sword to aim at his neck. "Irk!" Bruno twisted his body and escaped Ludger's blade. Hidden underneath his clothes, hard beetles were wrapped around him like chain armor. He's willing to have a close-distance fight. Is he a war mage? Bruno immediately tried to distance himself from Ludger. At that moment, a spell technique was carved in front of Ludger. Bruno's eyes widened. That's fluttering flame. A spell technique that seemed to form a burning flame was carved in just a few milliseconds. The spell of the 3rd-tier flame element, fluttering flame, engulfed Bruno in less than a second, emitting intense flames. "Arg!" The fire broke out along with Bruno's scream, brightening up the surroundings. The soldiers, who were staring at the entrance, looked back and opened their eyes wide. It's the enemy. How the hell?" But in the meantime, Bruno twisted his body inside the heat. The most difficult magic element for a wizard who dealt with insects was definitely the flame property. He couldn't believe that the intruder was utilizing an element that had nothing to do with the other 3 properties. It was unbelievable. How the hell? All the insects that were burned barely managed to survive, but Bruno's condition was not very good either. As he was half-melted from a burn on his whole body, he stared at Ludger while collapsing on spot. He thought that he hadn't let his guard down, but he also didn't expect that his enemy would be this extreme. "Who the hell are you?" Bam. Instead of answering, Ludger drew a revolver and shot through Bruno's head. At the same time, the backup power was activated and the light turned on inside the laboratory. Uo! No, no way, the insect brothers are dead. The soldiers who were in charge of the inner security looked at the bodies of the Bruno and Veron brothers and were at a loss. Even if they all combined their power, they would still lose in the hands of one of the brothers, and the intruder alone had overpowered both of the brothers. The soldiers lost their fighting spirit. There was no way they could fight a monster like that. Everyone stepped back from Ludger in fear, and a change was happening in Veron's body, which had been decapitated and had collapsed. Whoosh! Ludger responded immediately. As soon as the body flew forward, a huge hand scratched the space where Ludger had stood just before. It was an insect's front leg, full of sharp spines on its smooth shell. Everyone else watching the scene was also stunned. Weren't you dead? Ludger looked at Veron, who was moving his body, and asked that question. Veron's body, which had been decapitated, rose from its spot again. It was his bizarrely transformed right hand that had stuck out at Ludger. Veron stretched out his left hand, which was still in human form. There was a mouth in his palm. I was surprised. I didn't expect such an ambush. Is it your insect form? Oh, so you know, it was Bruno whose specialty was dealing with insects. On the contrary, his older brother, Veron, had a big body and didn't deal with bugs, so Ludger had wondered why they were called the Insect Brothers. Was it because of that? Veron was a black wizard whose body itself mutated like some kind of insect. Such a body wouldn't occur naturally, so he had actually used his own body as an experiment of black magic. Veron was an example of why black wizards were full of crazy people. Even so, your head was cut off, so I didn't expect you to be fine. My body is no longer that of a normal person's. At the same time, when he said that, Veron's body mutated with the chilling sound of crunching. The black robes surrounding his body expanded, and countless spines popped out. Ludger backed off. Veron, who already had a giant body, looked down at Ludger as he was growing even bigger. He had a horrible form of monster that looked like a mixture of various insects. At that point, it was hard to tell whether he was a black wizard or a cryptid. I can't believe you killed my younger brother. I'm not sad, but I'll make you take responsibility for it. Veron's arms pulled back and shot at Ludger like arrows. Ludger immediately flew up using a wire launcher. Veron's stab passed by Ludger's feet and penetrated the soldiers who were lining up behind. Run! Veron didn't care, even though his men screamed and died. Oh my. You're quick to make a move. You're literally like a flying insect. Veron looked up and tried to find Ludger. Boo-boom. At that moment, the steel structures on the ceiling collapsed and fell over Veron's head. Bomb, Veron was fine, even though a considerable weight of iron had fallen upon him. There was only a slight scratch on his shell, and there was no wound. Were you trying to draw my attention with this? Veron turned his huge head and looked at Ludger, who slowly landed on the ground with a wire. It was obviously a provocative act, but Ludger didn't respond much. What a bother. Veron's body was already out of the ordinary insects league. The shell surrounding such a huge body was also hard, so it was no wonder that he was called a monster beyond a mere black wizard. This is why they're black wizards. Ludger, who was about to shoot his revolver, quit and withdrew all his weapons. He realized that even 100 shots wouldn't work for Veron. Oh, are you giving up? Veron laughed at Ludger's actions, but Ludger stretched his hand out toward Veron instead. What is he doing? Ludger's actions, who stretched his arms toward Veron, went beyond provoking Veron's curiosity and even triggered his displeasure. Is he trying to use some kind of magic? However, it is practically impossible to attack Veron unless it was a spell above the 4th tier. Ludger, according to his judgment, was a 3rd-rank wizard. His spellcasting speed was so fast that it was bizarre, but that was all. He didn't think that Ludger could deal proper damage to him. It's not bad to give a little generosity and see what this cute intruder is trying to do. Veron made that judgment. I didn't want to use this in this situation, though. Well, it can't be helped. As soon as Ludger finished his sentence, the interior of the laboratory was filled with white light. It's still chilly. Ainz, who was waiting for Ludger outside the abandoned factory, trembled as he reached into his pocket in the cold, still night air. It had already been half an hour since Ludger went inside. It's almost time for him to finish it. Ludger had tried hard to not make it obvious, but Ainz realized that he was very angry. Well, he would be angry as well. He couldn't believe that those nuts had kidnapped a 7-year-old kid and his parents and used them as human experiments. No matter how much he was someone who couldn't be fair and square, there was a line that should be protected, even by people who did his kind of job. That Shamsa's school crossed that line too hard. He's a bit late. Was it hard since they had 2 black wizards? All the more so if the black wizards were the insect brothers, who had their own reputation in the underworld. But Ainz didn't think that Ludger would die. They'd known each other for years. Ludger was a man who should have died a long time ago. There was only one reason why he hadn't died. He was that strong. He doesn't seem to intend to make it obvious. He was a hunter who had hunted the monster in Javauden alone in the first place. There were more than 5 nights that the monster had eaten, and Ludger had hunted such a monster alone. Moreover, Ludger did not use only the identity of Abraham Van Helsing as a hunter. He was also a private detective, a mysterious thief, a criminal consultant, a mercenary, an artist, and so on. He had many faces, and each of the masks he had used in the past had always made a great impact. Startle, just when he thought it was about time, a strong light that made his eyes hurt came out from the entire abandoned factory. At the same time, the light turned into flames, transforming the abandoned factory into a sea of fire. It was a terrifying power that blew up the huge factory. Ainz knew very well who had done that, so he used it. Ainz himself referred to that skill as it, but in fact, Ainz also didn't know what kind of ability it was. He had asked Ludger about it once before. The only words that he had heard was Ludger's strange answer that it was a real magic. Magic is magic. What's real magic anyway? Anyway, Ludger's use of that skill meant that the opponent was that tough, and it showed how serious Ludger was about it. Ludger put the data from the laboratory and the experimental drugs that they had used for the experiments in a suitcase and went outside. Ainz, who was waiting outside, greeted him. "You came? Let's leave this place first. The police will come here even if it's an abandoned factory, since what you did here is quite fancy. How about the inside? I've taken care of everything." Ludger had checked deep into the lab after dealing with Veron. The horrible experiments' appearances that were trapped in a cage in the dark. They were all ordinary people who had enjoyed their daily lives, but their daily lives were eventually broken. They were those people who suffered from crossing boundaries where their bodies mutated. They had lost their reasoning and were no longer able to be called human. The only mercy Ludger could give them was to let them go to the hereafter without any pain. Ludger had blown up the entire laboratory, killed the scientists, and came out with their research reports and experimental results. "Is this it?" Ainz asked when he saw an ampoule containing red liquid inside the suitcase that he received from Ludger. "Yes. The world has become so scary. Who would have thought that there were people who do human experiments in a place like this? I never imagined that scientists and inventors would have joined hands with the Black Wizards. That's not all. Yeah, what else is there? How do you think they got a secret laboratory that big? There's someone behind them who's been giving them a huge amount of money. That's obviously a big problem. It must have required a huge amount of money to build a laboratory like that secretly. It meant that there were a lot of people behind the scenes who supported their backs. Don't worry, I already know who it is. Are you for real?" "Yes." Ainz felt uneasy at Ludger's answer. "Don't tell me." "Why, it's not that, right?" Ludger did not ask what it meant. He just stared at Ainz once. Ainz couldn't stop him then. Ainz, who immediately realized it, accepted the suitcase. "I'll go to the hideout first. If you're going to stop by there after work, just come." Ainz walked away without listening to Ludger's answer. Ludger stood still in his spot for a while. The bright red flames of the burned factory in the distance brightened the dark, abandoned factory zone. It was like the most spectacularly burning candle just before the fire went out. "You brought me this kind of food?" "Prong. In the interior of a luxurious mansion, the millionaire Belfort Rickson threw a plate of food that was brought by the maid. The maid, who was struck by the plate, flopped down, her forehead bleeding. The food on the plate stained her clothes and face, but no one could assist or help her. An old man in his 60s, whose white beard had been growing for years, showed a loathful glare at his maid and clicked his tongue. "Are you telling me that was food? What a load of crap for something I paid for." Belfort stood from his seat and left the dining room. He was a man who stood tall as a very successful capitalist in this era of revolution. But when he was successful, it was an old man full of wrinkles whom Belfort saw in the mirror. After all, he had dedicated his youth in order to gain his position. So he wanted to regain his youth. With that wish in mind, he had aided the Black Wizards in doing some kind of experiment. Recently, some of the experiments had escaped, and he was told that the experiment was messed up. Damn it, idiots. Useless trash, how much money do you think I've invested in you? Belfort returned to his room in a rage. Still, the experiment itself wasn't meaningless. Sooner or later, there will be a decent result from it. A drug that would bring the weakened human body back to its prime. The ability to gain back his youth was not far off. He wanted not only to be young again, but to also be healthier and stronger. It was the moment when he tried to turn on the light in his large room that had previously been dark while being immersed in such thoughts. Belfort Rickson. What? Who are you? There was someone in the center of the room. Belfort tried to turn on the magical light, but the light didn't turn on because something was wrong. Belfort was trapped in the room alone with an unidentified intruder in the darkness without moonlight. Security, security. They won't hear you even if you call them. He had already spread out a sound barrier in the room. Of course, since it was a millionaire's house, if someone used that kind of magic, the alarm would ring right away. Ludger's magic was so secretive that even the magic in the alarm wouldn't catch it. Ludger, who was sitting in a chair, stood up. And he slowly approached Belfort. Belfort Rickson, let me ask you a question. What? Who are you? Reveal yourself. A 7-year-old kid is desperately trying to survive this terrible reality, witnessing himself and his parents becoming monsters. Bomb. Ludger stretched out his arm, grabbed Belfort by the collar, and pulled him close to his face. His eyes glowed red in the dark. How do you think the person who knew they had no choice but to burn them to death feels? Chapter 34, A Step Toward the Truth, 3. Ludger still couldn't forget that moment. The kid's clear eyes that had looked up at him while licking his injured mother. Even when Ludger had used his spell to kill them, he had shown a genuine smile as if saying thank you to him instead. He couldn't forget it. He could never forget it. I don't know. How am I able to know? More than that, who the hell are you? You don't know. Ludger threw Belfort Rickson, whom he held by the collar, down to the floor. Belfort, whose body was in bad shape due to his old age, grasped his waist as he fell on the floor. Arg. Who the hell are you? Do you know what this is? Ludger took an experimental drug that he had prepared in advance out of his pocket and threw it in front of Belfort. It contained a red liquid that seemed like a melted ruby inside a transparent glass tube. There was no way that Belfort, who had instructed the scientists to make the drug, could not recognize it. This is. Do you know it now? What? What do you want from me? Do you want money? Belfort realized that the opponent had his weakness and went on with showing a submissive attitude. In addition to him being able to sneak into his room skillfully, the opponent even had the drugs of the experiment he was involved in, although Belfort didn't know how he had gotten it. No way is he affiliated with the Nightcrawler Night Order from the security department. Damn it. How the hell did those insect brothers not do their job? What did they think he was thinking when he invested a lot of money in it? Not only did they miss the experiments who escaped, but they had also let this mysterious man come to his residence. However, he could not immediately express his complaint. He didn't know who the man in front of him was, but there was no doubt that the man was clutching his life in his grip. I won't hold you responsible for sneaking in here. And since you secretly came to find me, you must have something that you desire, right? Something I desire? Yes. What do you want? Because I have a lot of money, I can give you as much as you want. But the answer that he heard from Ludger was far beyond Belfort's expectations. Answer. WH what? Answer the question I just asked you. The question you asked me, you said. Belfort racked his brain as hard as he could and recalled the question Ludger had asked him before. It was what he thought about a 7-year-old kid. Belfort opened his mouth in wonder. Was it you who got rid of the experiments that escaped? Haha, I see. It was you. Why didn't you tell me? If you suddenly threw me down like this, there was bound to be a misunderstanding. Thanks to you, the incident didn't spread like a wildfire. Just answer what I ask you. I get it. That 7-year-old kid, he's an experiment, right? What's the problem? He'd rather die since he had already become a monster so he won't be caught by others. Isn't he someone from a lower class whom people don't even know existed anyway? Is it something to be sad about if many of those guys died? They had made a noble sacrifice of their lives to produce excellent results instead. A noble sacrifice. Belfort Rickson genuinely thought so. What did it have to do with him if some of those lowly people rolling in the mud of society, whether they were laborers or poor people, died? They were rotten eggs that did nothing for society. Rather, if they became cornerstones as experiments that helped the completion of drugs that would bring back human youth. Wasn't that their way that would have normally been beyond their capabilities to contribute to humanity? Even if those dirty, low people work in a factory for 100 or 1,000 days, could they really get some money? It was much more productive to use those meaningless lives in a more valuable way, to be someone's experiment for drug development. That's what they meant to Belfort. Did you finish giving the answer? Yeah, that's enough. Then, you were too full of yourself and got blinded by it. Ludger grabbed Belfort by his neck. Belfort opened his eyes wide and grabbed Ludger's forearm with both of his hands, but his rough grip was too powerful for his old body to fight back. Cough. Why? He answered it properly. Belfort's eyes showed complaints toward Ludger. Instead of answering, Ludger put a bottle of medicine in front of Belfort's face, then poured it into his mouth. Bloop, bloop. Belfort tried desperately to resist the drug, but even that was impossible because he was being choked. Gulp. The red drug flowed through Belfort's throat. At the same time, changes began to take place in Belfort's body. Irk. Ag. With a severe pain that seemed like his body was tearing apart, Belfort's body slowly began to swell. Ludger let go of Belfort's neck, then he stepped back and watched the scene. His skin, which was full of wrinkles after being swept away by the tides of time, turned tight, and soon his skin split from side to side, then fur grew out in a massive amount. But his mutation didn't stop there. His growing fur fell out, revealing his red skin, and the skin began to swell like a bubble. Belfort had drunk all the drugs in the bottle. In fact, in the case of the experiments, only a small fraction of the drug was injected into them, considering they couldn't even handle it and that it would cause severe mutations. The amount of drugs that the old Belfort had drunk had already exceeded his own capability. Why? While his body was torn, twisted, and mutating, Belfort had no choice but to shout toward Ludger. It was when his face was strangely distorted and half mixed with the appearance of a beast. It was not a human cry or a beast's cry that was shouted out of Belfort's throat, but a voice that belonged to something else. No matter what I say, you won't even understand it, let alone repent. Then he doesn't have to understand. Instead, he should also feel the pain he has caused to others. Ludger lifted the sound barrier that had been spread. Brrrr. At the same time, a monodetecting alarm rang out throughout the house. Following that, the shout of Belfort, who had become a monster, echoed, Ag. What's this sound? It's an intruder. The voice was heard from Master Belfort's dwelling. Master Belfort. Bam, bam. Security from the outside knocked on the door strongly. Soon, the locked door broke, and bulky men rushed inside. Among them was a freelance wizard who was hired to protect Belfort. It's a monster? Where did this monster come from? Everyone, get out of the way. The wizard immediately casted fire magic and burned the monster. The monster was burned easily, unlike its hideous appearance. It had a very persistent vitality, so even though the body was burned, it continued to regenerate, but that just made the process of burning the monster last longer. The wizard also felt some kind of threat and poured all his mana into the flame magic. When an hour passed like that, the monster's body collapsed. It was no longer regenerating. Ha, ha, it's finally over. How about Master Belfort? Find him. No matter how bad he was as a person, he was still the employer who paid them salaries, so the people were eager to find Belfort Rickson. However, no matter how much they wandered around, they couldn't see Belfort, and they couldn't find any trace of him. Everyone in that place eventually had no choice but to reach one conclusion. It was that Belfort Rickson had been eaten by that monster. It was an absolutely absurd situation. At the same time, they didn't know. The secret safe that was hidden in Belfort's room, a safe containing Belfort's property that was hidden in a secret space behind a large portrait. It had been taken by someone. You came. The hideout that Ainz told him to meet at was a shabby house located deep in the alleyway of Leathervelk's commercial district. Worn-out signboards, creaky doors, and exterior walls and windows that were filled with oil stains. However, that only applied to its exterior, and when he went inside, there was no smell, and the interior was very clean. It looked like a normal pub on the outside, but it was just trickery. You chose a pretty good place. It's in the commercial area adjacent to the factory area. I had a hard time getting this. How about the surrounding location? I'm not done checking yet, but I'm sure that the back alleys of Leathervelk are pretty complicated. I need more time. I see. Ludger said so and put the safe he had brought on the floor. Ainz opened his eyes wide when a bam sound was heard. What's that? You must have had a hard time bringing it here. Not really. So is this a safe? It looks exactly like one. Yeah, it was magically secured, but I released the security magic on my way here so you can open it right away. Ainz didn't argue with such words. Ainz, who opened the door of the safe and checked its contents, immediately closed it. There are too many. Use some of it as a supply for your work. Hide the rest of its contents in the right place for now. Well, then, I would have no objection. Rather than that, are you going to go now? Yeah, you look a little tired. Why don't you take a break first before you go? I have a separate room for you. I'll check it out later. I think I'll be back here soon anyway. What identity will you use when you come here? The most suitable identity to do activity in the underworld. Oh, you mean that? Ainz didn't ask any more questions. More than anything, Ludger must have been pretty exhausted from the day's fight. Please rest well. I'll finish my work as soon as I can too. Yeah. Ludger stepped out of the hideout with tired steps. The air in the back alley, where people rarely come and go, was stale and warm, and the humidity adhered to the skin like glue. Whenever he walked on a road with a stale smell, he could feel the gazes that were exploring him beyond the darkness of the deeper alley. Hyenas of the back alley. They looked at Ludger like they were going to scan through him, and eventually they realized that he wasn't someone they could mess with, so they stepped back. When he was completely out of the alley, Ludger took off the hood on his head and pulled down a hood that covered his mouth and nose. As he was staring at some steamboats that were still wandering around Ramsey River, a loud bell rang out from the clock tower standing in the center of Leathervelk. Ding! 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 It was the sound that notified people of midnight. Ludger continued to stare at Ramsey River in the dark, until the memory of the eyes that the child had shown him completely washed off into the river. The millionaire Belfort Rickson is dead, was the front page of the newspaper's headline published in the city of Leathervelk the next day. The death of Belfort, the evil entrepreneur and one of Leathervelk's millionaires, was enough to heat up Leathervelk. Even more so because the cause of death was a werewolf attack. The monster was eradicated by a wizard who had been guarding the inside of the mansion, but the death of Belfort was a big issue. Some said that Belfort was punished by heaven, and the others said that Belfort met a disaster when he used evil black magic and couldn't control it by himself. Reporters clamored for days in front of the Ricksons' mansion, begging to get inside of it, Kriok. Then a black car stopped behind the reporters. Huh? The reporters stared at the person who got out of the car as they were full of curiosity. Who is it? There were a total of 3 people who got out of the car, and all of them were wearing the same attire. A black uniform with a golden epaulette on the shoulder. The eyes of the reporters widened as they recognized the attire, which was commonly called the black coat, that only authorized people could wear. Sex Security Department? The Nightcrawler Night Order too, moreover. The security department was not a particularly secretive organization. Rather, they had a tremendous reputation in the light and a terrible notoriety in the dark. The reporters gulped down their saliva. They had gone to the entrance of the mansion simply for gossip, but if the security department stepped up, it would be a different story then. Exclusive? Such a word continued to linger in the reporters' minds. It won't work like this. Since I won't be able to go inside anyway, I'll have to write something related to the security department. If even the security department is stepping up, it means that this is really a big deal. Moreover, the person who stands at the lead. Cold silver hair that contrasted perfectly with a black coat that had a combination of gold and red embroidery. The sharp-looking woman who tossed her hair up to show her forehead was a very famous person, Terina Lionhowl. She was the head of the Lionhowl Marquis family, which symbolized the protection of the Empire. She was the Knight Commander of Nightcrawler Night Order, who was affiliated to the security department. Her widely famous nickname was Lord Protector. The lion's cry had become a symbolic phrase for her, who had so far eradicated countless people who posed a threat to the Empire. The reporters were split side to side and made way for Terina, who walked unhesitantly toward the mansion. With her sharp charisma, she was the idol of all the female knights within the Empire. Open the gate. As the security department stepped up, even the guards guarding the entrance were bound to be drenched in a cold sweat. We were told not to let anyone in. The gate. Terina spoke while pointing her finger at the guards. Open it? Yes, yes. The guards, whose faces became pale, immediately moved. The tightly closed gates of Rixon's mansion opened wide. Chapter 35, Nightcrawler. Rixon's mansion became filled with tension after Terina Lionhowl and her 2 lieutenants appeared. The police inspecting the scene noticed Terina and saluted her as they quickly stood up. Ma Marquise Terina, it's an honor to meet you. My name is Inspector Teborin. Oh, yes, you've worked hard. May I ask, if you don't mind, what brings you here, Marquise Terina? Didn't you hear the news? Starting from now, all investigation into the murder in the Rixon mansion is under the control of our security department. Security department, you said. Inspector Teborin, who had a long mustache and whiskers, gulped down his saliva. He also didn't believe it was just a simple murder case, but if the security department came forward, it meant that the case was extremely dangerous. The security department didn't take action unless the case was really serious. Please excuse us. Everyone, withdraw. The inspector and his subordinates fled the scene quickly. All they had left to do was block the reporters who looked like hyenas, flocking in front of the gate while still watching the events inside the mansion. As the staring eyes disappeared, the young-looking female knight of the man and woman lieutenants following Terina relaxed her shoulders. Phew. I was having a hard time setting the mood. Oh ho, Enia, you should still show the honorific behavior of the Nightcrawler Night Order even if there are no eyes watching us. The female knight, Enia, scowled at her senior, Lloyd's, nagging. Well, senior. But still, we don't have to act like that now. Enia, you. Stop it, Lloyd. You only have to be like that in front of others. See, even the captain said that. This little junior is really... Deputy Lloyd eventually shook his head and raised a white flag. The Nightcrawler Night Order was a place where only elites gathered, just like the knights who were guarding the center of the Empire were supposed to be. But it was also a place where they spoke comfortably among seniors and juniors. It was all because Terina herself, the Knight Commander, liked such an atmosphere. However, it did not mean that their regulations themselves were loose. It had also been a long tradition of the Nightcrawler Night Order to deal with what had to be done in a more surefire way than anyone else. Most of all, the fact that the Nightcrawler Night Order did not collapse was evidence that their current captain, Terina Lionhowl, had great power of command and charisma. Don't forget about our purpose for coming here. Yes, yes. Rather than being an ordinary case, the incident was evaluated as such a serious matter that even the security department had to take part in the investigation. In particular, it was not just a usual serious case because Terina, the Knight Commander, had stepped up by herself in the connection between cryptids and black magic. It's just a rumor so far, but the dead Belfort was a man who had been suspicious and was on the list of people that we, the security department, were to keep an eye on. It's not just a mere coincidence that he was suddenly killed by a monster. Lloyd and Inian nodded at Terina's words. The three immediately began to investigate Rixon's room. Broken windows that appeared to have been caused by the intruder and black stains that could be said to be signs of a burnt monster. And the blood that was supposed to belong to Belfort that was scattered around. Witnesses had said a monster appeared and Rixon was killed. Given that their statements are all identical and consistent, they didn't think those witnesses were lying. After more than 10 minutes, they moved in search of possible clues, but there was no sign of anything. But as soon as Lloyd was about to say something after he thought that he had searched everything, it was then that Terina, who was thinking hard with her arms folded, suddenly strode toward one wall. "Captain, so it's here." What Terina stared at was a painting hanging on the wall. As one of the richest men in Leathervelk, Belfort had decorated his spacious room with all kinds of colorful artwork. Terina, who moved closer to the wall, touched the border frame of the painting and then picked up the mural in the corner and put it aside. "Captain, what's with that painting?" "There's a space behind it." Before asking if it was for real, Terina's fingertips, covered in white gloves, touched the center of the wall. Then the wall opened with a rattling sound as if it was pushed aside. A secret space that had a length and width of only 1 meter. "What on earth is this?" Inia asked while staring at the empty space with a curious gaze. Terina raised her voice in an apathetic tone while folding her arms. Based on its size and location, it was probably the place where his secret safe was hidden. Secret safe. Belfort Rixon was notorious for being a rich and evil entrepreneur. There must have been money that he hid to avoid taxes and some black money to avoid the surveillance of the empire. Is this the safe where he put that money? But there is no safe. Lloyd opened his mouth with a heavy face as he realized something. Someone took it away, I see. Yeah. Then who took it away? The employees of the mansion. Should we interrogate the butler, who was the most suspicious, first? Terina shook her head at Inia's remark that was already full of desire. No, it will be meaningless. The butler has nothing to do with this. Pardon? There is no way a man like Belfort could have confided his secret funds to someone else. He probably hid it thoroughly so that only he knew about it. But it's empty here. Just because he didn't tell everyone doesn't mean no one knows about it. Didn't Terina also find that secret space right away? Businessmen, millionaires, and merchants all have similar ideas. They're not that happy to open a bank account. They always want to keep valuables or gold coins within their reach for the moment. Only then would they feel at ease. Then who took it away? We're going to find out about it now. It's just a guess, but the person who stole the safe must have had something to do with Rixon's death. But they said that Belfort Rixon was eaten by a werewolf. I doubt it's a werewolf. Look at the traces left behind. Nearly half of the floor in this large room was burned. It was burned by magic, so it didn't escalate to a fire. It was only a precise range that the flames covered and burned, but it's still that big. That means cryptids and werewolves, no matter how big they are only 3 meters tall. They're also very big, but if you burned them to death, there wouldn't be a mark that big. And it was said that those who actually witnessed the werewolf initially mistook him for a monster. Since it was dark and the people were frightened, they may have had some kind of illusion. That wasn't the case, judging from the traces. The result is that someone is involved in the death of Belfort Rixon, an unnatural death, the appearance of a monster, and even the bad rumors about Belfort. There's a lot left to check. What bothered Terina most of all was the ability of the mysterious intruder to take the safe that was supposed to be inside without leaving any trace. She lit her eyes and tried to find traces, but the intruder had left no evidence, as if he was a professional. As if the safe didn't exist in the first place. No way. There was definitely a safe here, and it was here until last night. Her evidence for that was that there was no dust on the bottom of that empty space yet. No matter how enclosed the space was, air and dust were bound to enter. Then who on earth took it away? Her feeling that was as if she was trying to hold a blurry mirage with her hands was not unfamiliar. I'm so used to it that I feel like it's déjà vu. It was inevitable that Terina Lionhowl brought up the memory of her past all of a sudden. A couple of years prior, there was a thief who had created chaos throughout the continent. He was so mysterious that no one had ever seen his real face because he was blurred as if he were surrounded by the darkness of night, and his movements were extremely elusive. He was the one who had easily penetrated any heavy security measures wherever he wanted and taken away valuables without leaving any trace, causing many rich men to shed tears and anger. The thief, Arsène Lupin. Don't tell me that thief. No, no way. It's been a few years since he stopped his activities, yet he moved again now, but the method that had been used still disturbed her mind. Even if it was not him, she could not deny the possibility of the intruder being his acquaintance, accomplice, or disciple. Lloyd. Yes, Captain. Is there anything else unusual that happened in Leathervelk? Oh, well, there was one thing. What is it? One of the abandoned factories was burned down in flames. That's also the same day when Belfort died. So it's there. What happened in the abandoned factory that had been set aflame? Even the location was a remote place that people no longer visited. Let's go. The werewolf case that caused chaos in Surin and Leathervelk ended with the death of the evil millionaire. I was lying sick on the bed in the room of my accommodation. Uwag. If I knew this would happen, I would have prepared a little more before I went. I'm glad I didn't have to teach any classes today. Otherwise, I would have been in big trouble. Rather than a sore body, my spinning head and the following migraine were the most painful to me. I took out 3 pills and poured them into my mouth while lying in bed. Munch, munch. Others may think the pills were something like headache medicine or painkillers, but I was literally chewing mana pills that replenished mana. Usually, if someone was recovering their mana, it was common for them to recover their mana automatically over time or to drink mana potions. But because pharmacology had developed, it had become possible to grind mana recovery pills into powder and drink them in water, or to mix the starch like I had and turn them into pills. Powder and pills were easier to store and carry than carrying them around in the form of potions. In other words, it was a world that thought the pills that restored mana were not that marvelous. The distinction was just in how the same medicine had the best effects. Therefore, what was important in pharmacology was how good the efficiency displayed by its ingredients compared to the others. Effect, risk, and efficiency. Combining those 3 factors, the drugs could be rated from the best level, which was 1, to the lowest level, which was 10. The pills I was taking were my own original recovery pills. It was the pill that maximized its effectiveness at the expense of raising its risk a little because of my body type. Since it was my own special drug, it didn't go through any clinical trials, but it also didn't have any rating tag. I think that pill would probably have a pretty high rating, and I was chewing those pills instead of rice. It was a problem because I used too much of my energy. I always won my fights at a swift pace, but who knew that he would be a black wizard who changed his body in that way? Insect brothers. Because of the older brother, Veron, I had been given no choice but to use real magic, not the magic of this world. It was magic that combined the occult and mythological knowledge in the world I used to live in, not magic techniques or knowledge from this world. The problem was that the magic's after-effects were no joke. Taking drugs that replenished mana regularly was also something I had to experience because I had learned that magic. Sound? The sound that kept bothering me slowly faded and then disappeared. That voice could only be suppressed by using mana, so I had become a person who consumed mana just by breathing. Therefore, it was necessary for me to make up for the lack of mana periodically. It's a bit better. I was immersed in a different thought when my headache went away. The werewolf case at that time was able to be finished after I had stepped up. I had burned it all down without a trace, so they couldn't find any evidence of the werewolf experiment. The only problem was that there was a witness at the scene. Aiden, the freshman who had blocked me from killing the werewolves. Someone with a sympathetic impression along with brown hair that didn't stand out that much. But the greatest thing about him was his personality. His action to risk himself and throw his own body into danger to protect his friend, or standing up by himself without knowing that he was in danger, was a rare sight, even in Surin. Yeah, if I had to define him, he was like the main character in an anime or novel. In the case of the students who were taking my class, I remembered all of them, and the Aiden I recalled was a model student who focused on my class with shining eyes more than anyone else. Unlike other people, who were learning magic as if they were being chased by something, he was a hard-working type of a person who had entered Surin purely because he liked magic and enjoyed it. Such a fellow had witnessed the secret of the werewolves. If it was a game, I think the title Act 1. Surin's werewolf would come straight to my mind. He might be suspicious of me for killing the werewolves against his will right there. Fortunately, Leo and Tessie Fryad, who were there with him, didn't notice that. If Aiden had told them, it would be a different story. How could a freshman get caught up in such an incident and get closer to the truth? He didn't mean to be caught in it, but the situation had gotten so screwed up that it became like that. I put my hand on my forehead and swept my hair back. If it became like this, there was one method that came to my mind. Should I kill him? Chapter 36, Elemental Properties Class. 1. While I was contemplating whether to kill Aiden or not, I remembered when he had carefully approached the werewolves. His stupid act of pulling out a crude recovery potion and smiling at the werewolf's child. It's okay. I won't hurt you. Thinking about Aiden's life or death, I shook my head. I couldn't kill him. I could be as careful as I could if I did the work I had to do, but I couldn't completely rule out the situation where I was suspected by Aiden. Should I bring up the situation where I became a professor in Surin after I was caught up in terrorism while getting on a train? In the end, it was natural if something completely unexpected happened. There was a saying of Black Swan theory. When an event that's completely unexpected occurs, it analyzes the event by fitting together the cause of the event through the results of it. And in fact, it claims that there was a prelude to such an event, and that it was possible to predict it. It meant that post-analysis was easy, but pre-investigation might be harder to do, and that the event's causes were forced to fit together. But looking at my situation, it was impossible to fit the string of causes together, even if the Black Swan's theory was being considered. Most of all, I can't disturb Aiden anymore because he's getting attention from the principal. Of course, I was the one who had suggested giving him award points to the principal. But that was inevitable. I couldn't deny that the trio of Aiden, Leo, and Tessie were at the scene at the same time. And what could have been the result if I were to punish Aiden thoroughly, when the principal had not yet completely cleared me of her suspicions? In fact, the principal did not like the aristocratic-centric atmosphere in Surin, and was satisfied with the appearance of a commoner boy who played a big role. Moreover, although Aiden is a commoner, he possesses the rare, uncommon magic. According to his data, it was his teacher, a wandering wizard, who had taught him when he was young. It was a funny thing for him to be able to learn uncommon magic quickly just because he had been taught about it, and it was even funnier that his teacher was a wandering wizard. If it wasn't a strange fate, what was it then? Anyway, Aiden was a boy who knew how to use such uncommon magic and had been secretly receiving the attention of the principal for a long time. It was a dangerous thing, and I would gain suspicions if I messed around with Aiden. It was better if, why don't I use Aiden? As with the uncommon magic that he had, I had a strong feeling that something about him would bring about all kinds of events. The same went for his actions and his mental attitude. It felt like he was born to bring along righteousness. I thought that a person like Aiden might be able to face the Black Dawn Society hiding in Surin. It's not bad, but I'll just leave it open as part of the possibilities. After that night, I didn't even know what Aiden thought of me, and no matter what method had been used for him to learn uncommon magic, he was still only a student. It was better to watch over him for the next few days or weeks, judging from the severity of the situation. It wouldn't be too late to make a judgment then. Let's concentrate on my recovery for now. The voices had completely gone, but my body was still sore from the aftereffects, so I had no choice but to take a rest. I was worried about class the next day, but at that rate, I thought my recovery would be almost completed by morning. I closed my eyes while thinking Soterina Lionhowl frowned while looking at the burnt-out evidence. All burned to the ground, the site that used to be an abandoned factory was nothing but burnt traces. Captain, what can we investigate if the situation is like this? It looks like everything got burnt. Just as the two lieutenants said, the factory was burned down, and there were no clues left as to why it happened. Terina tapped the ashes with the tip of her military boots. As expected, this is strange. A fire breaks out in an abandoned factory where people don't visit often, and everything around here has been burned down. Did they burn down everything because they didn't want to leave behind a trail? I suppose so. When she heard the news of the fire, she had vaguely guessed that it would be like that. Looking at the ruins where there was nothing left, something tasted bitter. Terina patted her chin and arranged her thoughts. The death of Belfort Rickson, a mysterious thief, werewolf, fire in an abandoned factory, all happened the same day. All of those puzzle pieces were put in one place, and they formed a picture to a certain extent. But there was a big hole in the center of the puzzle, the most important piece. It was not known who was behind the incident. Lloyd. Were there any other cases besides this? When Terina asked him, Lloyd pushed the rimless glasses on his face with his fingertips. Lloyd, whose hair was neatly brushed in pomade, had more of a scholarly appearance than a knightly one, so to speak. And in fact, his main tasks were related to obtaining and organizing information and incident identification. There were no other special cases except for this one, but... I also heard that werewolves appeared at Surin Academy. Surin Academy? It wasn't that Terina didn't know about Surin. It was the Empire's best educational institution that fostered wizards. Established with the full support of various kingdoms, empires, and magic towers, Surin was also a place with history and tradition that was over hundreds of years old. In particular, it was also a famous place for giving equal opportunities to the commoners, and those belonging to the lower class if they had the ability, not just for the nobles and the rich. Surin was located within the Empire, but it was a place that was free from the Empire's touch. Werewolves appeared in Surin, he said. Yes, it appears that werewolves from Leathervelk infiltrated Surin through a sewer pipe. It must have been a big deal for the students. Fortunately, there were no deaths. There were about 2 people injured, but even their injuries didn't affect their lives. What happened to the werewolves that hid in Surin? The currently appointed professor dealt with them. I see. If it's a Surin professor, then they're bound to be an exceedingly decent wizard. How about the werewolves? Is there anything left? None. The professor burned them all. Burned, for a moment, she thought it was similar to the burning of the factory, but it was too much of a speculation. In the first place, it was common for flame spells to be used as the elemental magic to effectively eliminate monsters such as cryptids. Surin, huh? Do you want to go to Surin? You might get some clues. Terina shook her head at Lloyd's question. No, not yet. For now, I'm focusing on gathering the clues around here. However, it seemed necessary to keep in mind that there was also one possibility in Surin. Someday we'll find out. That's why she had come forward. The people who were doing their activities secretly in the Empire. She needed to uproot them and restore national stability. That was the mission and significance of the Nightcrawler Night Order. The classroom in which Ludger taught spellcasting. The students gathered there while talking among themselves about what had happened last time. Of course, the subjects of the conversation were werewolves and Ludger. Did Professor Ludger really hunt the werewolves? They said he was a soldier. I heard that he also achieved a military achievement for hunting cryptids, so it's probably true. Whoa, I already thought the atmosphere that he had was no joke from day one, so it was real. In addition, Ludger had stopped the fight between the commoner Lynn and the aristocrat Dynamer Romley, and even his adult-like speech was also mentioned in the middle of their conversation. Before the first day of class, Ludger's evaluation was not so good among the students. That was because he hadn't said much about what he would teach in his class, and had also announced conducting joint classes for the first and second years. He had boasted that they would know what he was about to teach when they came into his class, but how many people believed in that remark? It was said that he was a new professor, so why would he be so confident? His evaluation had improved when his past track record was revealed a bit, but there were still some negative judgments toward him. However, the source code that he presented on the first day of his class was a groundbreaking spell. From the moment he showed the spell, the students' evaluation towards Ludger was bound to change. Not only did the students who didn't attend Ludger's class regret not taking his class just because he was a new professor and a fallen aristocrat, but there were also some students who tried to change their course time so they could enter Ludger's class. Even the fourth years, who were getting busy preparing for graduation, were rejected for applying to his lecture late. As time went on, more conversations about Ludger's lecture circulated around. Even fellow professors were interested in Ludger's source code spell, and rumors had been circulating that the news had also entered the magic tower. The werewolf case was like a cherry on top for Ludger's achievements. Among the first and second years, the name Ludger Chelsea was bound to be known. Professor Ludger's name is mentioned a lot these days, huh? Lendl, who was still listening to the story about Ludger, recalled Ludger's appearance that day. The man who said the words he wanted to say coldly toward her, who held the status of a princess. No, his attitude, which seemed rather oddly hostile to her, clearly made her dumbfounded. No matter how she had done something wrong, he didn't have to speak in such a harsh way. Moreover, he actually treated my junior, Lynn, tenderly. At that time, the situation was so urgent that she decided to overlook it, but now that she thought about it, she felt it was somewhat unfair. She couldn't believe that there was someone in this world who looked down on the princess and cared more for commoners. Wasn't it usually the other way around? Of course, such a thought came to her mind when she saw Ludger fighting with the werewolf under the moonlit night. Just in time, the back door of the classroom opened, and a girl came in. She had ash-gray short hair and relatively long side hair. It was Lynn. Her shoulders shuddered at the burdensome gazes some students had toward her. Because of her incident with Dynama at the beginning of the semester, the aristocratic students did not look at Lynn favorably. As a result, Lynn was in a situation where she went around alone without making friends. Seeing that the seats in the classroom were almost full, Lynn had to go to the only empty seat. It was the most burdensome seat since it was beside Elendil, the princess. "Hello, Lynn. How have you been since that day?" I'm fine. Elendil." The seat next to the third princess. Even the aristocrats who wanted to make connections with the imperial woman were avoiding such a burden. Yet the commoner Lynn sat there. Even when Elendil greeted her in a tender manner, some students' eyes were bound to stare at them profoundly. What is that commoner doing? When did they become so close? Lynn couldn't raise her head, as the gazes toward her were getting more intense. Why are they doing this only to me? To be frank, it was her honest feelings that she didn't want to be involved with anyone. What happened at the beginning of the semester was just something light. No, it was not light, but it was just something that happened accidentally. After her mistake, Dynamo was punished accordingly, so she didn't mean to say anything about it anymore. But it was just uncomfortable for the third parties to step up as they pleased as if it was their business. Because of that, it was not normal for her to be hated by the aristocratic students. Kriak. The front door of the classroom opened. All the students shut their mouths. Everyone sat upright and stared at Ludger, who was entering the class through the open door. The man was exactly as looked on the first day. His movements were restrained, and his footsteps were silent. The only thing different was his attire. On the first day, he had worn a gray suit and a black frock coat along with a silk hat. But what they saw was different. He wore a white long coat with a black suit underneath along with a red necktie with the addition of a wine-colored scarf that was wrapped around his neck. He didn't wear a hat. His sharp gaze and sculptural appearance were clearly revealed. The students were focused on the sight. Some of the girl students stared blankly at Ludger. "I'll start the class." Along with those words, a pile of papers that Ludger brought was scattered in the air. A total of 80 sheets of paper flew in the wind and settled naturally on the students' desks. They were printed materials by a copy machine containing what he was about to teach that day. Today, I will explain the basics and principles of spell casting, one of the specialties of the elemental property. One of the 4 specialties of spell casting, elemental properties. It was the most important field for the wizards, and it was also the most popular specialization that most people thought of when they thought about magic. Even then, when magic had developed in various ways, the students would still think of fire, water, ice, and wind when they thought of magic. In other words, however, it was the most basic knowledge that most of the freshmen who had just entered Surin had already learned. When they heard that they were going to learn it again, the students' reactions, who expected some marvelous class, were bound to be somewhat disappointing. It was then that Ludger continued his explanation. "But this alone will not satisfy your passion and desire for learning magic, so I'm going to show you a new method here today." New method? Was there anything they needed to know for the elemental magic? When the students were all wondering, some of them who had already learned the advanced course noticed what Ludger was trying to do. This is a method to increase the power of elements that you can use from at least 20% to at least 80%. There's such a thing. They couldn't dismiss it as a lie, as Ludger had shown his own unique ways so far. "What do you think?" Ludger asked while skimming over the classroom. "Are you interested now? Chapter 37, Elemental Properties, Class 2. Some of the students looked puzzled. It was also a bad thing to raise their curiosity and not satisfy it right away. Ludger pointed to a student who was sitting in the front row. "The student in the front row there. Are you Anthony?" Yes, you are right, Professor." "Which one of the existing element properties can you use?" That water, ice, and plant." 3, it's moderate. What are you most confident about among those 3? "Well, it's the ice element." "Then can you implement and showcase your ice element here?" Listening to Ludger's words, Anthony said yes and floated a sphere of mana above his right hand. Basic mana release had begun, and the property of mana was genuinely embedded in it. A white sphere. To be exact, it was akin to a snowball that was tightly squeezed in his hands. "That's normal." Thank you. "It means that it's insignificant." Anthony's face sank sullenly as he listened to Ludger's words. "Look how I do it." Ludger floated a sphere of mana in his right hand. It was a lump of ice that was similar to the one that Anthony had made. It was very much the same as Anthony's ice property, but something was different. No, it was still changing. "Can you feel it?" The students did not respond to Ludger's question. They were just staring at the lump of ice that he created as if they were being possessed. If Anthony made a big snowflake, the element that Ludger launched was much colder and sharper than that, and it felt like perpetual snow that was lying deep underneath the northern continent. Ludger's element was not a mere white round ice, but it was more strongly condensed and took the form of snow crystals. The blue crystal emitted cold air around it, causing the illusion that the classroom itself would be covered with ice. "Can you tell the difference?" Ludger dispelled the crystal. But the students still stared blankly at the place where the element had existed. It was the same ice element, but Ludger's and Anthony's were very different. Was it because he had put in more mana? It was not like that. It was different in the efficiency itself. And that's what Ludger was going to teach them that day. Something's very different, right? How on earth did he do that? The atmosphere in the classroom gradually heated up. They didn't understand well when they only heard his explanation. But when they saw the magic in person, they became greedy. There was no wizard who would refuse the chance to improve their magic skills. Half of the 2 hours of today's class will be spent learning basic theories, and for the rest of the time, you will learn how to increase the efficiency in casting the element properties that I teach you. All the students focused on Ludger's words with sparkling eyes. Before we go into the principle of spell casting, let's start with the basic theorem of elemental properties. It's in the content of the papers that I shared with you. All the students looked through what was written in the handout. Element properties are so specialized in history and pedigree that they appeared immediately after the release of mana in spell casting. Magic could only be used with the existence of mana, and primal magic, the very primitive form of magic, was based on the casting of this mana. That was the first specialization of spell casting. It was mana release. What developed from the mana release was the elemental property, which contained natural elements in mana. Now it has become a part of spell casting, but in the early primitive forms of magic, element properties were called the foundations of all magic. Ludger said so and floated 4 mana spheres into the air. At present, natural science has established itself as expressing the power of the system to suit one's own magic. But when wizards were casting the element properties in the beginning stages, the emphasis was on the relationship between nature and humans. Each sphere of mana began to form a property. Each was fire, water, earth, and wind. These are the first 4 properties. Compared to the current age where the number of properties has increased to more than 10, the number 4 is too little and simple, but we can't just view these as mere properties. These 4 elements don't mean pure elements, but they contain the symbolism of the people's mindset back then. Earth was hard and strong. Fire was powerful and destructive. Water was soft and compliant. Wind was freedom. The students listened to Ludger as if they were being possessed. Theoretical lessons about the origin of magic should have just been boring. But no one thought it was boring. I already know everything. Flora was unhappy with it. As a person who knew all the origins of the element properties anyway, it was boring having to listen to what she already knew all over again. However, even though she knew it, her pride was hurt as she saw herself secretly attracted to Ludger's voice. Really? What's so interesting about his explanation? Since then, elemental properties have evolved and have begun to be analyzed with rational eyes rather than some natural symbols. The 4 elements increased to 10 elements afterwards. He keeps going on and on about what I already know. There was also a conflict between the mystical school that valued tradition and the natural science school that tried to apply modern science to further develop the element properties. He just has a handsome face and a good voice. In the end, however, we have no choice but to adapt to the changes in the world, not by the teachings of the school, but by where we should use this natural magic. But it's still worth listening to. Ludger, who dispersed the mana that had been floating in the air, glanced through the classroom and asked a question. Do any of the students here know for what purpose the magic of element property has developed so rapidly for? I'll give 5 award points to the person who gets it right. The example is the flame element. The students immediately raised their hands. Ludger pointed to the students one by one. There. It's to light up the fire and drive out the darkness. Wrong. Next. To burn and cultivate the forest. It's cliché. Next. Oh. Is it to eliminate the primal fear of human beings that was symbolized with darkness? You'd be better suited to writing poetry. Laughter broke out among the students. Flora Lumos, who couldn't stand hearing those answers any longer, raised her hand proudly. Right, Flora Lumos. It was to burn something to death. At that moment, there was silence in the classroom. Flora's words were that straightforward and shocking. Can you tell me exactly what that something is? Of course, it's another person. The students rolled their eyes while being speechless. Everyone there had the same thoughts. Ludger would give Flora a strong rebuke, but Ludger nodded instead. Correct. Flora Lumos, you receive 5 award points. For real, Flora had acted arrogantly as if saying that it was nothing. The students' eyes were staring at Flora. Before heading back to Ludger, they stared at Ludger as if asking if it was true. So Ludger opened his mouth. What did element property magic develop for? It's to slaughter. After civilization was established and formed its shape, magic had continued to develop. As the hierarchy was divided, the higher the magic hierarchy was, the stronger and higher the power to kill others. Yes, it was the power to kill. The first target was monsters, but even after the monsters were driven out beyond the backbone of the giant, to the shadow of the continent, magic was still getting stronger. Why, because of cryptids. However, there are very few cryptids wandering around. So why is magic getting stronger and sharper? It was because of human beings. Magic was developed to kill human beings, war, colonial rule, violence. That was the driving force behind the further reinforcement and development of magic. This was the era of peace where the war disappeared. So for the students who were learning magic, those words were taboo, to compare magic with its history and tradition to murder people. Ludger was like telling everyone there that they were a potential killer. But that was a fact without question. It was also a reality that the tradition-oriented wizards persistently denied. Fire is to burn people, water is to drown people to death, wind is to cut something, and electricity is to electrocute someone. The magic that developed with human history grew on the back of the driving force of war and slaughter. That is absolutely undeniable. Yes. After all, this element property that we learn is from the Tower of Babel that was built on the blood of countless lives and corpses. He took a breather for a while, then Ludger continued his words. You who learn that subject are the executioners of the slaughter. Gulp. The classroom was so silent that the sound of someone swallowing saliva rang loudly in it. As such, the topic that Ludger talked about was sensitive to all wizards and not only to the students who were learning magic. But we can change it. And Ludger's voice that was heard gently blanketed the whole classroom. There is no guarantee that we will do the same thing right now and in the future just because we did it in the past. Now that the world has changed, fire is not used to burn something. Take a look at the back pages of the handouts that I handed out to you. Come to think of it, there were handouts that he handed out as soon as he entered the classroom. They were so focused on the teachings that Ludger gave that they forgot about the handouts. The students hurriedly flipped over the handouts and examined the contents of the back page. There were crude photographs of various constructions that were printed in ink. However, there was no difficulty in recognizing the photographs themselves. Fire is not just used to burn, but it also provides energy with its burning power. In the cold, fire is a symbol of survival, not destruction. The flowing water spun a water wheel, and the river where the water gathered became a passage for countless boats to travel. Winds provided wind power to the spinning windmills, and the electricity itself replenished energy and emitted light. Water and ice washed away the heat in the burning desert. The meaning of element properties depends on how we behave in the future after learning it. Ludger's voice echoed in the classroom. To build something, not to destroy something. Not to get rid of the world, but to lead it in a better direction. That's the basic mindset you have to learn before you study element property. No one dared to speak recklessly. It felt like a big wave came in all at once and swallowed their bodies whole. But what they felt was not displeasure, but rather refreshingness, as if something that had been weighing their head was taken off. Even Flora Lumos stared at Ludger with her mouth wide open. Although they were obviously just flattering words, the feeling of that approach was different because Ludger did it himself and not anyone else. Use your strength for a better world. My teaching of element property class is for that. Ludger smiled at the students and stepped down from the podium. We will now begin to genuinely implement the element property. The students gathered in the classroom began to implement the elements. What elements they were specialized in were basically discovered from the time they first learned magic. The students who had been taught about magic even before they entered Surin did not have difficulty in launching their mana and adding their own elements into it. Ludger slowly walked around the classroom and pointed out the elemental spheres made by the students one by one. Joseph. Focus on the flow of your mana a little more. The element itself is fine, but the mana that you released is immature. Are you a Surin sophomore? Don't lose your concentration. Yes, Irina Caromen. Are you casting a plant element right now? Plant properties must have the freshness of nature itself, but yours seems to be seen like decaying leaves on the ground in late autumn. Get your senses together. Make sure you have a strong image of the sprouts that have just penetrated the ground in your mind. Yes, Ludger never spoke kindly. Every time he said a word, the students' faces collapsed ghastly. But what was more unfair to them was that Ludger was not wrong at all. More than that, his advice was far too accurate. It might have sounded harsh, But Ludger was looking properly at the students' weaknesses and at the same time provided a method on how to make them better. At first, he seemed to hurt their pride, but if they reflected on what he said, they would find out that he was not just nitpicking their flaws. However, it was true that Ludger's Spartan-style teaching itself was frightening to the young students. Whenever Ludger headed their way, the students were not able to properly implement their element property because they were too focused on Ludger. Whenever that happened, Ludger's nagging could be heard. "What are you doing now? Do you see magic as a joke? If you can't stay focused, it's not worth it for you to take my class." I'm sorry. Pay more attention to your magic before you speak. Close your ears and keep your eyes on what's in front of you. Yes, yes. One by one, whenever Ludger passed by, the students' murmur spread like a ripple, forming a harmony. Aiden, the commoner boy who took Ludger's class, sweated as he watched the professor getting closer to him. That was because Aiden had yet to be able to express a proper element property. Stop. Ludger stopped in front of Aiden. His sharp eyes turned to Aiden, who couldn't do anything. Chapter 38, Elemental Properties, Class 3. I looked down at the sullen Aiden and was rather taken back inside. What's wrong with him? At first, I thought that he was going to rebel against me. Was he expressing his subtle dissatisfaction because I had sent him away with wind magic when he had asked me to stop at that time and had been keeping it in his mind? Looking at his reaction, I don't think that's the case. He couldn't be acting with his face that looked like he was genuinely sorry and didn't know what to do. In other words, Aiden really didn't know how to release his property, which was the basis of the element property magic. I couldn't believe it. A rare, uncommon magic possessor couldn't do such a basic thing. Wasn't it like saying that a kid who was able to do backwards tumbling couldn't even walk properly? What should I do with this? I thought he was telling me to look forward to it, but I didn't think it was the case when I saw him stuck. Was it because of his uncommon magic that he was able to enter Surin in the first place? I can just ignore him like this. I didn't have to pay attention to those who couldn't even follow the basic lessons. The more I did that, the more I wasted the precious time of other students. Hadn't I said something when I let the first and second years take my class together in the first place? I didn't intend to be considerate of the students who couldn't keep up with my lessons. It might be a good thing to me that Aiden, who might know my secret, was falling behind in my class on his own. Yes, I didn't have to show any affection to him. The world, by nature, was such a cold place. Aiden. What are you trying to do right now? Aiden closed his eyes tightly while thinking that the time had finally come. You aren't even doing any element implementation. Are you going to rebel against me now? All the students' eyes were on Aiden and Ludger. Ludger frowned and looked back at the students. Have the students who are paying attention to me and Aiden already perfected your own element implementation so you can look away from it? Then I'll have to remember your faces and check it out myself. Hiek. The students immediately turned their heads and began to focus on their elements again. Aiden was drenched in a cold sweat and was at a loss as to what he should do. Ludger spoke while folding his hands behind his back. Aiden. Yes. Have you not been able to cast your element properly yet? Yes, shamefully. Aiden wanted to hide in a mouse hole. All the other students who had entered were following the class brilliantly, and he felt like he was falling behind and something was holding back his ankle. Aiden was also able to enter Surin due to some kind of exception that was applied to him. He still lacked basic things that others could do naturally. What elemental properties can you use? You know that, don't you? Fire, water, and wind. 3, that's normal. Ludger thought he would be specialized in more elements because he was able to deal with uncommon magic, but that wasn't the case. It was basic common sense that the more talented people were, the more elements they could handle. Then let's start with flame. Yes, pardon. Aiden thought he had misheard Ludger's words. It was the same for Leo, who was sitting next to Aiden, and Tessie, who was sitting behind him. It means I'll teach you. I can't let the students fall behind because they can't follow my teachings from the first lesson. But I extremely hate the idea of having such a person in my class. I don't take any disagreements. Focus. Ah, yes. Gather your mana. You can do basic casting, right? Yes. Aiden nodded and made a sphere of mana. It was a basic process that could not even be called first-tier magic that anyone could do once they were introduced to magic. Think of turning that mana into an element. As I just said before, it's a flame. I will try to do it. Aiden stared intensely at his mana sphere as if that was everything he could do. Tessie and Leo gave Aiden a cheering stare without saying a word. HNNNG. However, it was difficult for Aiden to properly implement the flame property, no matter how much he was focused. As soon as he thought that it wouldn't work like that, Ludger opened his mouth after watching him silently. Relax your mind. Don't think about it too much. No matter how hard you try to think of flame in your head, it will still be hard at first, so don't just think about it with your head, but feel it with your senses. Senses? You can compare the characteristics of the flame to your individual senses. The first one is sight. Imagine the figure of a burning fire. Close your eyes and focus. Yes. Aiden focused on the image of fire in his head after listening to Ludger's advice. However, it was not easy to think of the shape of fire that kept wavering in his head. Focus. Remember the moment when the fire was most intense in your memory. Yes, yes. Since Ludger said that, it made Aiden feel like he had an idea of what to do. Aiden, who was focusing his mind, was slowly able to bring out the most impressive moment in his memory. When he was burning the firewood in his country home, the senses he felt at that time. A fire that was burning in the fireplace. His own family had been watching it. The scarlet fire at that time wavered and shook from inside the heater. Ludger's voice rang in his ears. Now think of the sound of fire. Instead of answering, Aiden followed Ludger's instructions. Crackle, crackle. The sound of fire and burning firewood in the wind. The sound of fluttering embers put an end to the serenity and cold in the chilly air. Ludger's voice was heard again. Next is the sense of smell. No, it was close to guiding him deep into his inner side. Aiden wandered deep into his unconsciousness. The smoky smell of fire that was burning the firewood, at the same time, he could detect the subtle scent of charcoal. Aiden's family had even cooked stew over that fire. Since fire doesn't have a sense of taste, think of its sense of touch. Recall the senses in your skin when you faced the fire. Following Ludger's guidance, Aiden evoked the memories of his past like he was staring at a painting. His senses, which were being guided one by one, clearly recalled the memories of his past. And he could remember it. 8 years prior, in the cold winter when it snowed. It was a day with a raging blizzard over the dark blue window outside. Wrapped in thick clothes to avoid the cold, he had put firewood in the heater so that the burning fire wouldn't go out. His 2 younger sisters had clung to Aiden while whining that they were feeling cold. That was how the whole family had gathered in front of the heater harmoniously and eaten together. His younger siblings chattered, his mother nagged, and his father smiled softly as he bore witness to such a scene. Even though they couldn't eat fancy food and there was a cold wind blowing through the gaps of their clothes that weren't properly sewn. Obviously, the memory of that time was as vivid as if it was just happening. The fire was not hot. He wasn't even scared of it. Just, the flame that he felt back then was so warm, he remembered that he could spend a warm winter because of it. That's exactly it. Ah! As if it was a ripple on the calm water, Aiden opened his eyes after he heard Ludger's voice. And then he saw it, the small flame sphere that was burning in front of his eyes. Aiden opened his eyes wide in disbelief. It seemed to have summoned the warm flame that existed in his memory. The flame was closer to warm rather than hot, and closer to soft rather than destructive. Did I really implement this? That's pretty good. Aiden was stunned by Ludger's praise. It was the first time that Ludger, who had been brutally pointing out the flaws of the students who were called geniuses, instead of praising them, complimented someone. Aiden didn't know if he could call that a compliment, but Ludger spoke a positive sentence from his mouth. Other students, who pretended not to pay attention while pricking up their ears, were also shocked by Ludger's words. The flame transformed beyond the ordinary elements to become your own flame. Instead of imitating others and blindly implementing only what others have taught you, you showed the element of fire that you felt by yourself. Aiden, that's your own magic. This is my own magic. Aiden stared at the sphere of the flame he had created like a man who had sent half of his soul flying away. Was it because he lost his concentration? Whoosh! The fire disappeared like a mirage without a trace, but it felt like its lingering scent was still in the air. Aiden? Yes, Professor. Don't forget that sense. Ludger left such words behind and moved on to approach the next student. Aiden was still feeling like he was dreaming. Leo and Tessie, who were watching nervously from his side, tapped Aiden's arm. Aiden, you are awesome. How did you do that just now? Ha-hoo. Ludger's praise for Aiden fueled the motivation of the students who had yet to be evaluated. Ludger glanced at the students and opened his mouth. I'm sure you've noticed, but this is the method I wanted to teach you before I went into this class. The students all pricked up their ears. It was the application of your senses through your own experience. The students waited for his next explanation after the words, application of senses. The elemental property should be based on a basic understanding of the related element. Even a 3-year-old child knows that the fire is simply hot and the ice is simply cold. If you're a true wizard, you have to put something special in it. Something special. Think of the elements that you want to cast as intense moments that you actually face, not as some vaguely encountered memories. Not just simply your sight, but your 5 senses should also feel the elements. Don't just simply follow with your eyes. Feel the elements with your 5 senses. When they followed his advice, the students responded with joy. Oh, ooh, it works. Whoa, it's much better than it was before. The students, who were happy to learn such magic, were more focused on not forgetting the lesson. Ludger's words were not a lie. Their memories and experiences were combined, so the elements were more carefully recalled and implemented. So an element that was much more intense than the previous ones was implemented. Even the feeling of the element itself changed depending on their experience and tendencies. The element was painted in their own color. At that moment, a loud shout broke out from somewhere. Whoa, crazy, what's that? Overlapping element. You're already able to use that. Flora Lumos was at the center of the shocked gazes. She had created that element with a confident expression. To be exact, it was a combination of 2 elements, fire and ice. The shape of the burning fire had turned into the light blue color of ice, but the ice was still swaying a little. It was the so-called frozen flame. HMPH. This is nothing. At first, Flora had intended to implement just 1 element properly, because she thought it would be enough for her not to be disapproved by Ludger. She was already learning how to implement elements through her 5 senses, and because of her unique magical synesthesia, she was able to implement properties that were much more complete than others. But when Ludger had carefully taught a first-year student, and even given him a compliment at the end, something had heated up in Flora's heart. Her pride had not approved of the situation. Let's see if he will compliment me as well. It was not enough for her to simply fully implement 1 element. She was Flora Lumos. She was people's favorite in magic who had never let go of the title of genius, even in Surin. If the magic she casted was only a single element, it would obviously hurt her pride. So she casted 2 elements. And those 2 elements were flame and ice, which could be said to be the opposite of each other. If the 2 magic techniques were coordinated and woven together so that they did not infringe on each other, fire and ice could coexist. Rather, each element's characteristic was combined to change into a new form, just like she had done. The overlapping of elements was called the advanced level of elemental properties. Flora Lumos could easily combine the 2 elements. Flora suddenly became greedy. Maybe it was because she was in a strangely good condition and she was spiritually high. At that moment, perhaps, she could succeed in triplicating the elements, which she had been unable to do before. Frozen fire, if I put the wind element in here and make it swirl. A magic that was created by overlapping 2 techniques. Flora started creating another new technique from there. 3 overlapping elements by adding 1 element to the existing 2 elements. It was a magic that had always failed before, but somehow she felt like it was going to work. She was already laughing while imagining Ludger's face that would be ruined in a good way for her when she completed the technique. It didn't take long for Flora's complexion to change. Oh, Flora first saw it through her own eyes. As soon as the three colors were about to beautifully blend, they suddenly deviated from their shape and began to collide with each other. Stench permeated through her nose. It only meant one thing. It was the moment when the magic flowed in a different direction than what she had intended and ended with failure. No, in the end, greed only caused misfortune. Three properties collided with each other, generating an intense energy. Flora clenched her teeth and tried to suppress the energy, but it didn't work out as smoothly as she wanted. The magic that was already beyond the threshold was out of her control. As the three elements merged into one, they began to emit intense light. Oh, wait. The intense mana was felt in the center of the classroom, and the students realized that something was strange. Flora, hurry up, stop, her best friend Cheryl, who was sitting next to her, shouted, but Flora could not answer her. Biting her lips, she could only desperately suppress the out-of-control mana. But it started to get harder and harder. I should block it, no matter what. At that rate, it would explode. With the determination to at least avoid damaging the surroundings, Flora put a magic barrier around herself. Even if the magic exploded, the magic storm wouldn't spread outside. Then, Flora closed her eyes tightly. At that time, her hands touched something warm. Oh, Flora opened her eyes. Ludger stood in front of her. While facing her, his hands gently wrapped around the back of her hand as he was holding the magic as tightly as possible. How on earth? She was sure she had spread up a magic barrier. Ludger, who had easily broken down the magic barrier, spoke while adding his mana. Focus, Flora Lumos. PR Professor? Don't give up. Control your mana. Flora stared blankly into Ludger's eyes. Despite the impending explosion of mana, Ludger's eyes showed no sign of fear. Because I will help you. Chapter 39, Flora Lumos 1. Ludger's mana gently wound around over the mana that was about to explode. Blue mana wrapped over the white light that was at its bursting point. The overlapping elements that expanded in all directions and seemed ready to erupt became a spherical form and gradually stabilized. Flora was breathless while staring at such a sight. At that moment, Ludger's voice awakened her senses. It's not over yet. Don't distract yourself. Ludger's thick and warm hands that were holding her hands together and his reprimand that seemed to reproach her. Flora came to her senses again and focused on dealing with her mana. If you stop here, your magic will disappear without you being able to accomplish anything. Do you want that? Flora clenched her teeth at his words. The magic that was deviating gradually regained its stability, but if she stopped there, the magic would not become anything. Ludger spoke. He was telling her that since she had come that far, she should see it through. Yes, rather than leave it as a failure. She couldn't let the magic that she was trying to cast disappear. Flora responded to him by squeezing out all her remaining mana. In order to meet Ludger's expectations, who was helping her, she had to complete the magic. Woo-woong. The three round elements gradually decreased in size and eventually began to take on the faint shape of something. Flora opened her eyes wide to the sweet smell that brushed past her nose. The color. The scattered and wild colors returned to their original places. No. The colors went beyond returning to their original shape. They started to beautifully harmonize. Oh, she stared at the magic that was being implemented in front of her with trembling lips. It had started due to stubbornness and sudden greed. The previously failed triple properties. Her reason for attempting it had been, in fact, a childish act to get a word of appraisal from Ludger's mouth, who had been looking down on her. For Flora, who was born with a talent for magic, even difficult high-tier magic could eventually be achieved. Therefore, magic was considered too easy and natural for Flora. She was not pleased with her success. She didn't dwell on her failure. It was because any magical feat was something that she could naturally achieve someday. She had thought that such a mindset wouldn't change. She had thought that, even if she succeeded in what she had failed so far, she would feel no joy. That's what she had thought. So you succeed. Flora did respond Ludger's words. She felt something choked up in her heart. Her eyes were stuck to the finished elements. The white wind revolved fiercely in an atomic orbit around the frozen flame like a sharp awl. Fire, ice, and wind were combined into three superimposed elements. Flora felt the illusion that not only her gaze but her soul was being swept away by the brilliant beauty that it created. "It's beautiful." Cheryl said so as she was watching the scene anxiously from the side. Yes, the magic that she had wanted to create was as beautiful as looking at a work of art. Flora's reaction in particular was much more passionate than other students. What excited her were more than simple senses of sight and smell. It was the sense of spiritual inspiration that bubbled like a foam deep in her heart. The sense of accomplishment of being able to cross the wall that she felt when she completed a magic that she had not been able to achieve so far. Although it was not achieved by herself, she still could not resist her joy. SSSSSS. The impressive magic soon disappeared into a colorful powder of light. As she watched the scene as if she was being possessed, Ludger opened his mouth. "Flora Lumos." "Yes, Professor Ludger." Flora answered Ludger's call calmly. But she was only calm on the outside, not on the inside. She might burst into tears of joy if Ludger spoke an appraisal from his mouth right there. That's how excited she was. "You've done something foolish, I see." "Yes, pardon." But along with the cold words that came out of Ludger's mouth, Flora belatedly realized what she had done. She had almost put every student in the classroom at risk for her own greed. As she was faced with the reality that she had forgotten due to the joy of her successful magic, Flora had no choice but to bow her head gloomily. Anyone who challenges and fails at a new magic can be like that, but it must be the wizard themselves who has to bear the cost of their failure in the end. Not the other students, but you. "I'm sorry." What Ludger had said was correct 100 times over. She had almost put her other classmates in danger. At the end, she had felt that she was responsible for it and put up a magic barrier to surround the exploding mana, but could she have completely prevented the damage? If Ludger didn't step up, someone might have died. But most of all, what I reprimand you for, Flora Lumos, is the amateurishness of your magic. "Pardon? Amateurishness of her magic," he said. "What on earth did he mean by that? When you first overlapped the elements, you mixed the elements of fire and ice, right?" "Yes, I did that." Fire and ice are the opposite of each other. That's why it's hard to mix them together. Beyond putting up an effort to make the techniques not conflict, you also needed to create a stronger effect by harmonizing both techniques. Yes, you are right. And Flora Lumos had done it successfully. She had implemented a magic that became one by mixing opposing forces with each other. "Then what's so amateur about my magic?" Her voice was bound to be mixed with disappointment. If he was just going to reprimand her, he just had to do it because of her excessive effort to triplicate her magic. Why did he point out her perfectly accomplished overlapping elements of fire and ice? Flora thought that Ludger might be trying to undermine his evaluation of her established overlapping elements, using her mistake. No, but even so, when she was in danger, Ludger had helped her control the mana that was out of control after going through the magic barrier that she had spread. Beyond the understanding of mana and the ability to see through the magic structure, if one did not have an excellent control of mana, it was them who could end up in danger. Ludger had helped her to put up with that danger. There was absolutely no reason for Ludger to just ruthlessly undermine her. But she still felt somehow unfair about it. She just wanted to hear a compliment. As soon as she was about to be disappointed, Ludger created a sphere of ice and flame based on his mana. I'll show you why it was amateurish starting now. Ludger combined the two elements that he created into one. He adjusted the techniques so that the mana from the properties did not collide. He combined the two techniques into one, and he forced the overlapping elements to harmonize with each other. Flora stared intensely at the sight so she wouldn't miss a thing. The whole process was obviously similar to what she had tried before, but the result was not the same. Oh, Flora's overlapping elements, which had simply cased the flame to become as beautiful as ice, and Ludger's overlapping elements that he showed were fundamentally different. Flora Lumos compared the overlapping elements that she had created with the overlapping elements that Ludger created, the combination of fire and ice. There was certainly no difference in terms of the elements. However, the results of the two elements were entirely different. Appearance. That was also true, but fundamentally, the energy that was contained in the overlapping element itself was different. Flora, who was especially sensitive to magic, could feel it more clearly than anyone else. The color and smell were different from hers. It was clearer and more fragrant. Flora Lumos, do you know what kind of overlapping elements I've created? Flora hesitated for a moment and nodded. It was impossible for her not to know. Yes. Then explain it. The overlapping elements that you created have a different dependence on mana. The spread of the flame and its power to engulf the surroundings and the coldness of the ice property coexists with it. On the other hand, how about yours? Pardon? I'm asking about yours. Flora just moved her lips slightly and was speechless. Eventually, Ludger spoke instead. Flora Lumos. The overlapping elements that you created was just magic that was beautiful in shape and had not the slightest bit of practicality. Flora shuddered at the scathing remark. You don't have to be so harsh. Such words surged up to her throat, but the moment she met Ludger's sincere gaze, those words were swallowed all the way in. Magic should be practical. If not, at least, there should be no meaningless magic. It's the basic foundation of all magic. Ludger had said as much before entering the lesson. They had to use magic in a better way to make and achieve something, not to kill something. That would lead the world in the right direction. But Flora, how is your magic? Frozen flame. It's a basic flame-burning form of magic technique surrounded by elements of ice. Yes, it's obviously beautiful because the shape of a burning fire was frozen. Ludger spoke in his usual tone of voice. But that's all. Flora had no excuse for that, because everything that Ludger said was true. Are you thinking of getting a job in a circus with this magic? Or did you plan on going to the Crystal Palace in the capital and displaying your magic beautifully? It's not like that. Then what is the significance of the existence of your magic? Is it just a self-parade to show off that you can use overlapping elements? Self-parade? Ludger's point was irrefutable. She didn't know where she would use it. It was just a beautiful magic. She was just proud about being able to use the overlapping elements, nothing less and nothing more. I'm sure I'd appreciate the fact that you mixed a wind element in it and gave some purpose to the magic to an extent, but even that attempt failed. Flora bowed her head at his last words, which were full of truth. Cheryl, who was sitting next to her, looked at her worriedly, but she couldn't convey to her any comfort in that situation. Ludger scattered the scorching cold that he had created into the air. The overlapping elements that climbed close to the high ceiling of the classroom exploded like fireworks. For a moment, all the students in the classroom felt the illusion that they heard the sound of burning ice. Cold air that resembled white frost spread throughout the classroom without touching the ceiling and scattered subtle snow. It fell down and melted away before it could reach the students. However, all the students who had gathered in that place could feel it. It was a magic that had extremely opposing elements since there was also a spreading flame within it. It was the best magic to extinguish a fire. Flora Lumos. Your overlapping elements were quite interesting. I've never seen a wizard at your age displaying that skill. Flora's eyes, which were distracted by Ludger's magic, turned to Ludger again. It was the moment when she stared at the man's face who was looking at her with a pitying look. She felt somewhat guilty and emotional. But the intention of what you did was wrong. I'm not talking about your skill. I'm talking about something much more fundamental than that. Do not use magic just to show off. That kind of action, Flora, lowers your value. My value? Yes, this is heartfelt advice for you. He had been biting her harshly so far, but he was talking about value, but Flora had no choice but to agree with Ludger. The magic she had created was just beautiful in its outward appearance, because of her intention to show off her skill in order to get a compliment from someone else. On the contrary, what Ludger had made was much more practical, even though it had the same overlapping elements as hers. The power of the flame also had its own firepower, but once it was attached to the other elements, it did not extinguish properly and spread in a flash. Big incidents that happened due to fire always occurred from a big spread of fire. Ludger had captured such characteristics with the chilly air. The chilly cold air that spread like an infectious disease the moment it exploded. The purpose of that magic was to extinguish and devour the spreading fire instead. considering that it was a magic that so far had been used to launch and shoot ice purely in the form of a weapon or to cause a wide range of snowstorms. What Ludger had created was very practical. I lost. Again. She thought she'd get recognition that time, but she didn't. Let alone being proud, Flora realized how impatient and foolish she was. I've never been like this before. Most of all, the sincere gaze that Ludger had shown toward her. It didn't escape her mind. It was an attitude of genuine concern, not intended to ridicule or to have contempt for her. Has anyone ever looked at me like that? No. There were always only two kinds of stares that headed towards her: envy and jealousy. Not to mention her own family with her brothers and sisters that she didn't want to see. Even her seniors were jealous of her, and so were Surin's professors. Flora's talent had caught up with their teaching in an instant, even though they had learned magic for many more years. Whenever that happened, the professor's eyes were always filled with an unbearable flame of jealousy. Flora knew it, but she hadn't shown it outwardly. Because that's what real talent was. There was no need to be joyful or sorrowful over the gazes of those who were jealous of her talents. But she didn't mean to let it slide either, so she had trampled on their pride while presenting them with a more overwhelming appearance. She had thought that it was obvious, but just then, Flora was confused for the first time in her life by Ludger's unfamiliar attitude. Professor Ludger. He had saved her from her nearly failed magic. He had helped her to overcome the wall of the 3 overlapping elemental properties, which she had not been able to overcome until then. Then he had looked her in the eye and given her a harsh lecture. Flora belatedly realized that she was dizzy and out of breath. Mana depletion. She had consumed too much mana to implement the 3 overlapping elements of magic. I'm tired to death here, but is Professor all right? Ludger, who had suppressed the mana that was about to burst, would have consumed much more mana, but his breathing was still normal. It was the first time that she felt a real wall, and the wall was so high and thick that she wasn't sure if she could cross it. But she didn't want to give up. Flora felt a sense of competition. Flora made a strong resolution to herself that she would definitely go beyond him next time. What is this, Grit? Ludger, who was chewing on the mana recovery pill that was secretly hidden in his mouth, trembled unconsciously. Chapter 40, Flora Lumos 2. After I gave my advice to Flora, I looked at the situations of several other students and gave them advice as well. It's not hard to teach them. The casting of elemental properties was the most basic subject. Some may have thought that it was easy and nothing, but there was nothing more important than elemental properties to build a proper foundation. Elemental casting used 5 senses that were close to a form that had developed with a framework at the basic level. Actually, I didn't know that the basics would be that important either. The magical elements that were created by the mana that was used by the wizards were slightly different from the elements that simply existed in nature. To be exact, the mana that was floating in the atmosphere was closer to imitating the elements with its strange power. Of course, if the world recognized the mimicry itself as real and was hit by fire magic, the world would have been burned. Naturally, it could be implemented with mana and did not occur naturally, such as the warm and cozy flame that was casted by Ainz a while ago. In other words, the elements that were created with magic were fake and real at the same time, 2 literally contradictory characteristics coexisting with each other. It was called the mystery of magic. The elements that were created by such magic naturally followed the tendency of the wizard. The ice magic that was used by cold and cool-headed people, and the ice magic that was used by people who were full of passion and were hot-blooded would show completely different results, even if they were using the same spell. Wizards who had traveled the world and experienced many more varied experiences could carry more diverse emotions in their magic than the magic that was used by wizards who were confined to the corner of their room. Right. In the end, magic itself was more like putting human emotions into mana. Just like there are songs that have emotions and songs that don't. However, as the magic of that time was only casted thoroughly by theory and calculation, the emotional method was a very old method that was no longer left in the history books. Perhaps it was still written in an old and worn-out book in the far corner of the library in the Magic Tower. It was not that no one knew such a method, but it was still a little-known method compared to what it was in the past. I knew it because my teacher had taught me. My teacher taught me how to maximize the elements through the senses. It was a method that only I, the disciple, was informed of, and this dull-witted disciple was releasing his teacher's tips to the whole world in order to survive. I'm sorry, teacher. But if I hadn't done that, my life would have been in danger. Anyway, magic was such a mysterious study. It reminds me of the first time I learned it. When I had first learned that magic existed in this world, I had believed that I would become a great wizard whose name would remain in history. The fact that I was reincarnated from another world was enough for me to hold such hope. Of course, such a dream quickly came to an end. Because I had no outstanding talent in learning magic by myself. It was possible up to the basics, but that was all. It was practically impossible for me to be a great wizard who would remain in history. Therefore, I had no choice but to change my direction of learning magic. Basically, my limit was easily using magic up to the 3rd tier. If I overdid it, I could use basic 4th-tier magic. If I looked at my level, I'd be at the beginning point of a 4th-rank wizard, and that was my best and my limit. I couldn't use magic beyond that, so I improved the quality of magic that I could use up to the 3rd tier. That was the reason why I had kept strengthening my basics. Most of all, I had memories of my past life, so I could look at magic with a slightly different perspective than the others. Source code was the representative example. In addition to that, I had received Spartan-style teaching from my teacher, so I could be proud that the basics of my magic were more solid than anyone else's, and the method that I had been sticking to so far had finally shone in Surin. At the time, I had complained about why they had asked me to do this, but now that I think about it, there's nothing better than this situation. Perhaps magic that used the 5 senses was a method that even the Magic Tower had not taught them. At least, it was like a secret sauce of a famous restaurant that was given in hints only to the important, talented people who were being promoted from within the cooking schools. I had just made it public. In fact, the students were also satisfied because there were noticeable changes in the outcome of their magic. But I can't let my guard down. Flora Lumos, who would have thought that she could use overlapping elements at that young an age? Overlapping elements was not just about combining different elements. It was a risky move that could have more serious consequences if the wizard handled it incorrectly. So the method of formulating the magics had to be altered to make sure they didn't collide with each other. Therefore, when the wizard was using the overlapping elements that were well suited to each other were often combined, just like water and ice, fire and wind, wind and electricity. However, Flora had overlapped elements that were opposite to each other, which were fire and ice. Perhaps that was not enough for her, overlapping 3 elements, all of which had quite a high-level difficulty in elemental properties, was also attempted. It was just not a skill that a wizard could show at that age. I realized again that Flora was not called a genius in Surin for no reason. Even so, she almost failed, an out-of-control mana fluctuation. I also felt dizzy from using too much mana because I had frantically suppressed it. Fortunately, I was lucky that I had recovered quickly, because there was a mana pill in my mouth that I had secured in advance. Otherwise, I might have stumbled disgracefully in front of the students. So I slightly felt like wanting to scold Flora, albeit severely. In the past, I had also been very confident in my new magic creation when my teacher had shattered my confidence terribly. At that time, I had done a lot of dangerous things to cast great magic. When I thought about it when I was about to sleep, I might have kicked the blanket with my feet loudly because of it. Flora, who had succeeded in overlapping 2 elements and was overly proud because of it, coincided with my old self when I had been learning magic from my teacher. The memory of that time came to my mind, and the panic button was pressed on its own. That was also why I had pushed Flora a little too hard. I belatedly thought that I was a bit harsh, so I said, "Actually, it's because I'm worried about you. You know how I feel, right?" as an excuse. Maybe she's terribly hurt inside from that. but she was called a genius, so she'd get through it easily, right? I decided to turn my attention away from Flora and focused on the rest of the students, as expected. Maybe because it was Surin, but everyone is already good at it, even though I just gave them a few simple tips. I saw some students who were particularly noticeable. The first thing I saw was a student who was casting the elements of the compressed earth. It was a brown-skinned girl with animal ears on her head who implemented an element that looked like she pulled up a vein of the ore that existed deep underground. Was her name Ayana Obley? I had seen her on the first day as well. She was the only beast person in the classroom, after all. She looked back at me as though she felt my gaze. I just nodded lightly to express that she had implemented the element admirably. I wonder if I had done something marvelous because she opened her mouth wide with an ah. I ignored her and looked at the next student. It was someone with a plant element. A dark blue-haired girl with braids and large, round glasses that were covering half of her face unfolded such magic. She looked like someone who said I'm good at studying just through a glance. She was a girl who was sponsored by the alchemy school, and she had her own reputation among the freshmen. Was her name Clara Hannis? She was pretty good, too. Other than her, there were twin sisters who were from a rather famous aristocratic family in the Eastern Kingdom, and there was even a rookie who was being sponsored by the Magic Tower. Even that rookie seemed to have quite a sense of rivalry toward Flora Lumos. I heard that this year's freshmen consist of only amazing students. I'm entering the academy at such a peculiar time, too. It was called the Golden Age. I thought I had heard Professor Selena say that there were many such children in the first year. And surprisingly, most of them were taking my class. I was going crazy due to too much pressure. I had a little hope of wanting my class to be somewhat moderate. It felt like I was losing my energy because of teaching those smart kids one by one. It was just then. As the class was nearing its end, I found the only student who could not float the elemental property. That kid her face was familiar. That was because I was bound to notice her bright gray hair and heavenly beauty. She had been there when something happened at the first training ground the previous day, and she was also there during the werewolf incident. But most of all, I knew that kid well for another reason. I approached her. "What happened, Lynn?" "Oh, Professor Ludger. Is it not working well?" No, that's..." Lynn hesitated to answer. Next to her seat was the princess, Elendil. "What? Did the two get close since then?" Elendil shook her head in silence when I looked at her as if asking what had happened. Then Lynn sighed and released her mana and floated the sphere. Since Lynn was also able to enter Surin, she had basic knowledge and talent for magic, so it was possible for her to float the mana. It was fine so far, but the problem happened afterward. I precisely caught on to what the problem was. "Your casting of the elemental property doesn't work well, I see. No, to be exact, does the property itself not exist?" "Yes." Lynn was the possessor of mana without any properties, which appeared very rarely. "I'm doomed." Lynn was afraid that she might have taken up a lot of time pointlessly. As she bowed her head like that, the clock bell rang in the classroom to announce the end of the class. "This is the end of today's class. Everyone, review what you learned today. I'll replace the homework with that." "Oh, but don't try to get away with it." "I've remembered all the properties you used today, so I'll check them out in the next class." Some students, who were happy with the news that there were few assignments that time, hurriedly redirected their eyes when they met Ludger's gaze. "I will be able to spot those of you who don't practice properly. I'm looking forward to that." Thank you for today." The students ran away from the classroom. As soon as Lynn was about to get out of her seat, Ludger called her up. "Lynn." Yes. "You follow me to the professor's office." "Oh." Lynn swallowed her breath unknowingly. The remaining students looked at Lynn with pity. In the spell-casting class, the elemental property was the second most important specialization after the release of mana. But those without any properties didn't work like that. Perhaps he called her because she couldn't carry out his lecture properly, so he would recommend that she attend another class. That was only the second week, but Ludger's class had already been rumored to be the best in Surin. His teaching in particular, which strengthened the foundation of their elemental properties, was enough to hedge the students' expectations. Not being able to take such classes in the future went beyond just missing a teaching in Surin. It was almost half the loss of their life. If they didn't know from the beginning, they wouldn't know. It was a different level of problem to quit his class that they had already taken and experienced themselves. Of course, most students were relieved that they were not the target. The person concerned, Lin, was about to cry. Following Ludger, who walked slowly in the hallway, Lin moved with quick steps to chase him from behind. Lin couldn't hide her ominous feelings while following Ludger. Why did he call me? Is it a personal interview? So is he about to kick me out of his class? Although it was only the third time she had seen him, including the incident in the training ground before, Lin fully understood what kind of person Ludger was. If she thought of Ludger's extremely sharp personality, she would be able to attend his other lecture in a good case, and in the worst case, she would be kicked out of Ludger's class. I'm doomed. Lin was depressed for some reason and bowed her head. It was better to change her class as soon as possible, because it was still at the beginning of the semester. But it was very painful for her to leave Ludger's lecture and not another professor's lecture. She would not be that sad even if she happened to pick up a jewel on the road and had to throw it back on the side of the road. Come in. As they had already arrived at the private professor's office, Ludger opened the door that had his nameplate on it and went inside. Lin entered Ludger's office as if she was a prisoner on death row who was heading to the gallows. Inside the office, the interior itself was quite sophisticated and neat. The place resembled its owner indeed. That man used a place with an antique atmosphere. Sit down. Yes. Lin sat on the sofa after she heard Ludger speak, frozen. The leather on the luxurious sofa was obviously so fluffy that she should have been comfortable, but Lin had no choice but to keep straightening her back. Ludger sat at his office desk, and then he opened the drawer and pulled out a pile of papers. Lin closed her eyes tightly at the sight. As expected, he's about to send me away to another professor's lecture. Would he nag if I knelt down and begged him to let me take his class? What if he despised me more? At the moment when her mind was getting more complicated, a thin book was being pushed toward Lin. Lin closed her eyes tight and cried out, I will do my best. I'll do everything you told me to do, so please don't tell me to stop taking your class. I'm in trouble if I don't take your class. Despite Lin's desperate appeal, Ludger was unwavering. What are you talking about? It's not like that. Yes, this is not a lecture change application form. What are you talking about? Pardon. I thought I couldn't take classes from you anymore. You're saying something weird. Just hurry and pick it up. Lin politely accepted the book that Ludger had given her with both hands. What kind of book is this? With that thought, Lin, who looked at the title of the book, had no choice but to widen her eyes. Understanding non-property, magic, the large letters on the cover of the book caught her eye. For more chapters, join my Patreon, link in description.